What if Catelyn Stark convinced Ned to refuse Robert's offer to be Hand of the King? Let's explore the depths of it in the video. The crypts of Winterfell stretch deep beneath the ancient castle, where the stone kings of old watch over their descendants with cold eyes. Robert Baratheon stands before the tomb of Lyanna Stark, his broad frame casting shadows across the carved roses that adorn her stone effigy. The flickering torchlight dances across his weathered face as he stares down at the sister of his dearest friend, the woman whose death sparked a rebellion that changed the Seven Kingdoms forever. She was beautiful, wasn't she? Robert says, his voice heavy with old grief. The King of the Seven Kingdoms looks older than his 35 years in this moment, the weight of 17 years on the Iron Throne etched into every line of his face. Ned Stark stands beside his old friend, watching as Robert's hand trembles slightly above Lyanna's tomb. At 35, the Lord of Winterfell still carries himself with the quiet strength that made him legend, but there is sorrow in his grey eyes as he looks upon his sister's resting place. She was, Ned says simply. She was that and more. For a moment, the two men stand in silence, lost in memories of a time when they were young and the future seemed bright with promise. Robert's jaw tightens as he turns away from the tomb, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. The years of wine and feasting have thickened his once powerful frame. But in this moment, Ned can see glimpses of the warrior who smashed Rhaegar Targaryen at the trident. "I need you, Ned," Robert says, his voice cutting through the stillness of the crypt. "The realm needs you. Jon Arryn is dead, and I cannot rule without a hand I trust." He turns to face his oldest friend, his blue eyes fierce with desperation. "Come south with me. Help me be the king this realm deserves." The offer hangs between them like a blade. Ned feels the weight of duty and friendship pressing down upon him, just as he felt it when Robert's rebellion began all those years ago. But this time is different. This time he has more than his own honor to consider. "Robert," Ned begins, but the king cuts him off with a wave of his hand. "I know what you're thinking," Robert says, pacing the narrow space between the tombs. "You think the capital is no place for a man like you. You think the court will poison everything you touch." He stops and grabs Ned by the shoulders, his grip strong, despite the years of soft living. "But that's exactly why I need you there. You're the only man in the Seven Kingdoms who won't try to play me for a fool." Ned looks into his friend's eyes and sees the boy he once knew, the young lord who fought beside him against impossible odds. But he also sees the damage that 17 years of kingship have done, the way the crown has worn away at Robert's spirit until only echoes of his former self remain. "Give me time to think on it," Ned says finally. "This is not a decision I can make lightly." Robert nods, though disappointment flickers across his features. "Of course. We'll speak again before I leave Winterfell." He claps Ned on the shoulder with false cheer. "Come, let's return to the feast. Your wife will wonder where we've gone." When they emerge from the crypts, the great hall of Winterfell blazes with warmth and light. Hundreds of candles illuminate the ancient stones, and the scent of roasted meat fills the air. The king's party mingles with the lords and ladies of the north, their southern silk bright against the dark wool of northern garb. At the high table, Queen Cersei sits beside her children, her golden hair gleaming in the candlelight as she watches the festivities with calculating green eyes. Ned takes his place beside Catelyn, noting how her hand trembles slightly as she reaches for her wine cup. His wife has been tense since the royal party arrived, though she has played the gracious hostess with the skill expected of a daughter of House Tully. Now, as she leans close to him, he can see the worry etched into her beautiful features. "What did he want?" Catelyn whispers, her voice barely audible above the noise of the feast. "We'll discuss it later," Ned murmurs back, placing a comforting hand over hers. But Catelyn's eyes remain troubled as she watches Prince Joffrey sitting beside their daughter Sansa. The 12-year-old boy already displaying the arrogance that seems to run in Lannister blood. Her gaze shifts to her own children scattered throughout the hall, Robb laughing with his friends, Jon sitting apart as always, young Bran climbing the pillars despite her constant warnings, each of them precious beyond measure, each of them safe within these walls. Later, when the feast has wound down and the guests have retired to their chambers, Catelyn finds Ned in their solar, staring into the dying embers of the fire. The weight of the day's events sits heavy between them, and she knows, without asking, what Robert has requested. "He wants you to be his hand," she says, closing the door behind her. Ned looks up at her, his grey eyes reflecting the firelight. "How did you know?" "Because Jon Arryn is dead, and Robert trusts no one else." Catelyn moves to stand before him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "What did you tell him?" "That I needed time to think." "And what are you thinking now?" Ned rises from his chair and moves to the window, looking out over the godswood where the heart tree stands, sentinel in the moonlight. "I'm thinking of duty, of friendship, of what I owe the realm that made me who I am." Catelyn joins him at the window, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "And what of what you owe your family? Your children who need their father here, not hundreds of leagues away in that nest of vipers they call a court? The realm needs good men in positions of power, Cat. If all the honorable lords stay safe in their castles, who will protect the innocent? Who will protect our innocent if you're dead in King's Landing?" Catelyn's voice sharpens with fear and frustration. "Have you forgotten what happened to your father and brother when they rode south? Have you forgotten that my sister's letter warned us the Lannisters killed Jon Arryn?" Ned turns to face his wife, seeing the tears that glisten in her blue eyes. "You think Lysa spoke true?" "I think Jon Arryn was an old man who stood between Cersei Lannister and whatever she wanted. And now he's dead, and she wants Robert to name a new hand she can manipulate or destroy." Catelyn's voice drops to an urgent whisper. "They will kill you, Ned, just as they killed Jon Arryn, just as the Mad King killed your father and Brandon." The comparison hits Ned like a physical blow. He remembers standing in this very room 17 years ago, receiving word that his father and brother had been murdered in the Red Keep. He remembers the rage that followed, the way it felt to know that the men he loved had died far from home, victims of southern politics and royal madness. "This is different," he says, but his voice lacks conviction. "Is it?" Catelyn steps closer, her hands framing his face. "Your father went south to answer for his son. Your brother went south to rescue his betrothed. Both of them died because they trusted in honor and justice in a place where neither exists." Her voice breaks slightly. "Don't make me bury you too." Ned closes his eyes, feeling the weight of her words. He thinks of Robb, growing into manhood and needing his father's guidance. He thinks of Sansa, still so young and innocent, dreaming of knights and songs. He thinks of Arya, wild and fearless, who would be lost without her father's protection. He thinks of Bran, always climbing, always reaching for something just beyond his grasp. And he thinks of little Rickon, barely more than a babe, who deserves to know his father. "What would you have me do?" he asks quietly. "Robert is my king. More than that, he's my oldest friend." "Tell him no," Catelyn says simply. "Tell him that the North needs you, that your family needs you, that you cannot abandon your duties here for the sake of southern politics." She pauses, her voice growing stronger. Tell him that you will not sacrifice your honor and your life to clean up the mess that 17 years of his negligence have created." Ned opens his eyes and looks at his wife, seeing not just the mother of his children, but the daughter of House Tully, raised in the art of political survival. She understands the game in ways that he sometimes forgets, knows how to see through the pretty words to the steel beneath. "And if he commands me to come?" "Then you remind him that he is Robert Baratheon, who won his crown by defying an unjust king. You remind him that friendship works both ways, and that friends do not force each other into impossible positions." Catelyn's eyes flash with determination. "You remind him that the North remembers, and we do not forget what happens to Starks who go south." For a long moment, Ned says nothing, staring out at the Godswood where his ancestors lie buried. Finally, he nods slowly. His decision's made. "You're right," he says quietly. "The realm may need good men in King's Landing, but my family needs me here. And I will not leave my children fatherless for the sake of a crown that should have been better worn." Catelyn's relief is visible, her shoulders sagging as tension flows out of her. She reaches up to kiss him gently, sealing their pact with the warmth of her lips against his. "Tomorrow you will tell Robert that Lord Eddard Stark belongs in the North," she whispers against his ear, "and that the King of the Seven Kingdoms will have to find another hand." The fire burns low in the hearth as husband and wife stand together at the window, watching over the lands that are theirs to protect. Neither knows that this moment will change the course of history, that Catelyn's fear and wisdom will set in motion events that will reshape the Seven Kingdoms in ways they cannot imagine. But for now, there is only peace in their solar, and the knowledge that House Stark will remain whole and united in the trials to come. Outside, the wind whistles through the towers of Winterfell, carrying with it the promise of the long winter ahead. But within these walls, the wolves are safe, and that is all that matters to the Lord and Lady of Winterfell as they prepare for the difficult conversation that tomorrow will bring. The guest chambers of Winterfell echo with the sound of breaking pottery as King Robert Baratheon hurls his wine cup against the stone wall. The dark red wine spreads across the ancient stones like blood, and Robert stares at the stain with wild eyes. His hands shake with rage as he reaches for the wine pitcher, but finds it already empty. 17 years, Robert growls, his voice thick with drink and fury. 17 years I've worn this damned crown, and the one man I trusted above all others abandons me when I need him most. The king paces the chamber like a caged animal, his heavy footfalls echoing off the walls. At 35, Robert should still be in his prime, but the years of feasting and drinking have taken their toll. His once powerful frame has grown soft, and his face bears the marks of a man who has found no joy in the crown he won with his warhammer. "Your Grace," comes a soft voice from the doorway. Queen Cersei enters the chamber, her golden hair gleaming in the candlelight. She moves with the calculated grace of a lioness, her green eyes taking in the scene of destruction with practiced calm. The servants heard shouting, "Are you well?" "Well?" Robert barks out a bitter laugh. "My oldest friend, the man who stood with me when the world burned, has just told me he values his precious honor more than the realm he helped me win." He turns to face his wife, his blue eyes blazing with wounded pride. "Ned Stark refuses to be my hand." Cersei's expression remains carefully neutral, though a flicker of satisfaction crosses her features before she can hide it. "Perhaps it is for the best, my lord. The North is far from King's Landing, and Lord Stark has always seemed more comfortable with his trees and his honor than with the realities of governance." "What are you saying?" Robert's voice is dangerous now, but Cersei does not flinch. Only that a king needs advisors who understand the game that must be played. The realm faces many challenges, and perhaps it is time to consider someone with more practical experience. She moves closer, placing a gentle hand on his arm. Someone who knows how to manage the crown's debts and keep the kingdom stable. Robert stares at his wife, seeing through her subtle manipulation, but finding himself without alternatives. You speak of your father. Lord Tywin has served the realm faithfully for decades. He was hand to the Mad King, and he ended the war when he took King's Landing. No one questions his competence or his loyalty to the crown. Cersei's voice carries the weight of absolute conviction. And unlike Lord Stark, he would not abandon his king in his hour of need. The suggestion hangs in the air between them, like a blade waiting to fall. Robert knows what his wife is doing, knows that every word has been calculated to lead him toward this conclusion. But as he considers his options, he finds himself trapped by his own poor choices and the weight of the crown. "Stannis," he mutters, more to himself than to Cersei, "my brother would serve if I commanded it." "Your brother despises you," Cersei says bluntly. "He has made no secret of his disapproval of your reign, your spending, your personal choices. Would you truly trust the realm to a man who questions your every decision?" Robert grimaces, knowing she speaks truth. Stannis has grown increasingly bitter over the years, constantly criticizing Robert's rule while offering little in the way of constructive solutions. The thought of enduring his brother's lectures for however many years remain of his reign makes Robert's stomach turn. Renly, then. He's young, but he has a good heart and men like him. "He's a boy who plays at being a lord," Cersei replies dismissively. "Charming, yes. But charm does not balance ledgers or negotiate with foreign powers. The realm needs someone with experience, someone who has proven his ability to rule effectively." She pauses, letting her words sink in. "The realm needs my father." Robert moves to the window, staring out at the godswood where ancient trees stand silent in the moonlight. He thinks of Jon Arryn, the man who had served as hand for 17 years, managing the day-to-day governance of the realm, while Robert hunted and feasted and hoard his way through 2 decades. Jon had been like a father to him, patient and wise, and completely without personal ambition. The thought of replacing him with Tywin Lannister feels like a betrayal of everything Jon represented. But as Robert considers his options, he realizes how few they truly are. The great lords of the realm are either too young, too old, too ambitious, or too hostile to his reign. Some, like Ned Stark, are too honorable for their own good. Others cannot be trusted with the power that comes with being Hand of the King. "Tywin Lannister," Robert says finally, testing the words on his tongue. They taste bitter, but no more bitter than the alternative of ruling without a capable hand. The realm owes him a great debt for ending the war. "Indeed," Cersei agrees, though she is careful to keep the triumph out of her voice, and think of what it would mean for Prince Joffrey, to learn statecraft from his grandfather, to understand the responsibilities that will one day be his. She moves to stand beside Robert at the window. "My father could teach him to be the king you want him to be." The mention of his heir sends a stab of pain through Robert's chest. He loves his children, though he sometimes struggles to connect with Joffrey's intensity and Myrcella's sweetness. The boy will need guidance if he is to rule successfully, and Robert knows his own example has not always been the best. "Very well," Robert says, his voice heavy with resignation. "Send a raven to Casterly Rock. Tell Lord Tywin that his king has need of his service." Cersei bows her head gracefully, hiding her smile of victory. "I shall see it done immediately, Your Grace." Meanwhile, in the solar of Winterfell's keep, Ned Stark sits alone before the dying embers of his fire. The decision he made weighs heavily upon him, though he knows it was the right choice for his family. Still, the look of betrayal in Robert's eyes haunts him, the way his oldest friend's face had twisted with hurt and disbelief when he delivered his refusal. Catelyn finds him there, still dressed in her feast clothes, but with her hair loose around her shoulders. She moves to stand behind his chair, placing gentle hands on his shoulders as she feels the tension in his muscles. "You did the right thing," she says softly, though she can sense his inner turmoil. "Did I?" Ned asks, staring into the glowing coals. "Robert came to me as a friend, not as a king. He asked for my help, and I turned my back on him. You protected our family. You kept us safe." Catelyn's voice carries the weight of absolute conviction. "That is what a lord must do first and always. The realm has survived without your counsel for 17 years. It will survive without it for 17 more. Ned reaches up to cover one of her hands with his own, taking comfort from her touch. "I pray you're right. But I fear we may have lost more than just Robert's friendship tonight. The North has always stood apart from the South, but never in opposition to it. If Robert names someone else as hand, someone who sees the Northern lords as obstacles rather than allies, then we will face whatever comes as we always have," Catelyn says firmly. "Together, as a family." She squeezes his shoulders gently. "You cannot save the realm, Ned, but you can save your children, and that is enough." The next morning dawns grey and cold, with the promise of snow in the air. In the great hall of Winterfell, the royal party prepares for their departure with all the ceremony such occasions require. Servants load wagons with supplies, while grooms ready horses and the great wheelhouse that will carry Queen Cersei and her children south. Robert stands in the courtyard, wearing his travelling clothes, his face a mask of carefully controlled anger. The warmth that had existed between him and Ned for the past several days has vanished, replaced by the cold formality of king and subject. When Ned approaches to bid him farewell, Robert's response is curt and dismissive. "Lord Stark," Robert says with icy politeness, "I thank you for your hospitality. Winterfell's halls have been generous to my party." "The honour was ours, your grace," Ned replies, bowing formally. "I pray your journey south is swift and safe." For a moment, the mask slips, and Ned sees the boy he once knew looking back at him with wounded eyes. But then Robert's jaw hardens, and he turns away without another word. Cersei approaches with her children in tow, offering Catelyn a smile that doesn't reach her eyes. "Lady Stark, thank you for your gracious welcome. Perhaps our paths will cross again in more favourable circumstances." Prince Joffrey, 12 years old, and already showing signs of his mother's beauty and his supposed father's strength, offers Sansa a courtly bow. "My lady, it has been a pleasure to make your acquaintance. Perhaps we shall meet again when next I travel north." Sansa blushes and curtsies prettily, her romantic young heart stirred by the prince's attention. "I would like that very much, your grace." Watching this exchange, Catelyn feels a chill that has nothing to do with the morning air. There is something in the boy's eyes, a coldness that reminds her uncomfortably of his mother. She makes a mental note to speak with Sansa about keeping her distance from southern princes and their pretty words. As the royal party finally departs, their banners streaming in the wind, the Stark family gathers in the courtyard to watch them go. Robb stands beside his father, already looking every inch the heir to Winterfell despite his 14 years. Jon Snow remains slightly apart, as always, but his dark eyes are thoughtful as he watches the column disappear down the King's Road. "Will we see them again?" young Bran asks, his 7-year-old voice carrying more wisdom than his years should allow. "Perhaps," Ned says carefully. "The world is large, but the great houses have long memories." Arya tugs on her father's sleeve, her 9-year-old face scrunched with worry. "Are you sad that the king is angry with you?" Ned lifts his daughter into his arms, holding her close as he considers his answer. I am sad that an old friendship has been strained, but I am not sorry for the choice I made. Sometimes the right choice is not the easy one. Meanwhile, far to the west, Casterly Rock rises from the shores of the sunset sea like a great golden fortress carved from the living stone. In the highest tower of that ancient seat, Tywin Lannister sits in his solar, reading the raven that arrived that morning from Winterfell. The Lord of Casterly Rock is 54 years old, his hair more silver than gold now, but his mind remains as sharp as Valyrian steel. He has been expecting this summons for days, ever since word reached him of Jon Arryn's death. The only question was whether Robert would turn to him immediately, or try some other option first. The fact that Ned Stark refused the position tells Tywin everything he needs to know about the state of Robert's reign. The king is weak, isolated, and desperate. The realm totters on the edge of financial collapse, held together only by Lannister gold and the lingering respect for Robert's name among the common people. "Kevin," Tywin calls to his younger brother, who sits nearby reviewing household accounts. "Send word to King's Landing. Tell his grace that I accept his gracious offer with gratitude and humility." Kevin Lannister looks up from his ledgers, noting the satisfaction in his brother's voice. "You mean to take the position?" "I mean to take the realm," Tywin replies calmly, setting the raven aside. "Robert Baratheon won his crown with his hammer, but he has never learned to rule with his mind. That failure ends now." The older Lannister moves to the window, gazing out over the lands that have belonged to his family for thousands of years. Soon he will hold not just the West, but all 7 kingdoms in his grasp. The thought brings him deep satisfaction. "Prepare to depart for King's Landing within the fortnight," Tywin continues, "and send word to Jaime. I will have need of him in the capital." As the day draws to a close, ravens fly across the realm carrying word of the change to come. In the Red Keep, servants prepare the Tower of the Hand for its new occupant. In Winterfell, the Stark family settles back into the familiar rhythms of northern life, unaware of how their choice has shifted the balance of power in the 7 kingdoms. The Game of Thrones continues, but the players have changed. And in the West, the richest and most powerful lord in Westeros prepares to claim his greatest prize, the governance of the realm itself. Winter is coming to Westeros, but for House Lannister, a golden summer has just begun. The gold and crimson banners of House Lannister flow like rivers of silk from the towers of the Red Keep as Tywin Lannister enters King's Landing, with all the ceremony befitting the new hand of the king. His column stretches for nearly a mile along the King's Road, filled with knights in red cloaks and men-at-arms bearing the golden lion upon their shields. The small folk line the streets to watch the procession, their faces showing a mixture of awe and uncertainty as the richest lord in the 7 kingdoms claims his place at the right hand of the crown. Tywin himself rides at the head of the column on a magnificent destrier, his bearing as straight and proud as a man half his age. At 54, the Lord of Casterly Rock commands respect through presence alone, his cold green eyes surveying the capital with the calculating gaze of a master strategist. He wears travelling clothes of fine leather and silk, but the golden pin fastening his cloak bears the lion of his house, and every man who sees it knows that power itself rides through the gates of King's Landing. Behind him rides Sir Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, resplendent in the white armour of the Kingsguard. At 32, Jaime remains one of the finest knights in the realm, his golden hair and handsome features marking him clearly as Tywin's son. The crowd's reaction to him is more mixed. Some cheer for his beauty and skill at arms, while others whisper of the oath he broke when he killed the Mad King. But all fall silent when his green eyes pass over them, for there is something dangerous in that gaze, something that promises swift retribution for any slight. The procession winds through the streets of the capital, past the great sept of Baelor, with its crystal crown gleaming in the afternoon sun, past the dragon pit where Targaryen beasts once nested, until finally it reaches the Red Keep itself. There, in the courtyard where Aegon the Conqueror first planted his banners 3 centuries ago, King Robert Baratheon waits to greet his new hand. Robert has dressed for the occasion in cloth of gold and crimson silk, the crown of the Targaryen kings upon his brow. But the finery cannot hide the changes that 17 years of kingship have wrought upon him. His face is flushed with wine, even at this early hour, and his once powerful frame has grown soft around the middle. When he smiles at Tywin's approach, there is no warmth in it, only the calculated courtesy of a king who knows he needs what his hand can provide. "Lord Tywin," Robert says, his voice carrying across the courtyard, "welcome to King's Landing. The realm rejoices in your service." Tywin dismounts with fluid grace and goes to one knee before his king, though there is nothing subservient in the gesture. When he speaks, his voice is calm and measured, each word precisely chosen. "Your grace honors me beyond my worth. I live to serve the crown and the realm." "Rise, my friend," Robert commands, though friendship is the last thing either man feels. "Come, we have much to discuss. The realm faces challenges that require your expertise." As Tywin rises and follows Robert into the keep, the courtiers and servants gathered to witness the ceremony begin to whisper among themselves. All know that a new age has begun in King's Landing, though none can yet guess what that might mean for the realm. Within the hour, Tywin has established himself in the Tower of the Hand, the massive stronghold within the Red Keep that serves as the Hand's residence and seat of power. The rooms are still being cleared of Jon Arryn's belongings, but Tywin wastes no time in making the space his own. Maps of the 7 kingdoms cover every available surface, marked with notes in his precise handwriting about trade routes, tax revenues, and military strengths. "Send for Lord Baelish," Tywin commands Sir Kevan Lannister, his younger brother, who has followed him from Casterly Rock, and Lord Varys. "I would speak with them immediately." Kevan nods and hurries to comply, while Tywin turns his attention to the ledgers that chronicle the crown's finances. What he finds there confirms his worst fears about Robert's reign. The Iron Throne owes nearly 3 million gold dragons to various creditors, with the largest debt owed to the Iron Bank of Braavos. The Crown's annual income barely covers the interest on these debts, let alone the principal, and Robert continues to spend gold like water on tournaments, feasts, and gifts to his favorites. "My Lord Hand," comes a smooth voice from the doorway. Petter Baelish, called Littlefinger, glides into the chamber with the easy confidence of a man who has survived and thrived in the dangerous waters of court politics. At 30 years old, he is small and slight, with quick grey-green eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. His doublet is fine silk in shades of blue and silver, marking him as a man of some means, despite his humble origins. "Lord Baelish," Tywin replies without looking up from his ledgers, "I trust you have brought the financial records I requested." "Indeed, my lord, though I fear you will find them illuminating." Littlefinger sets a thick bundle of papers on Tywin's desk, his manner deferential, but not servile. The Crown's position has grown increasingly precarious in recent years. Tywin finally raises his eyes to study the Master of Coin. He has heard much about Littlefinger, his rise from minor lordship in the Fingers to his current position through wit and cunning, his reputation for making gold appear where none existed before, his rumored network of spies and informants throughout the capital. Most importantly, Tywin knows that Littlefinger is a man without strong loyalties, one who will serve whoever offers him the best opportunity for advancement. "Tell me plainly," Tywin says, "how long can the Crown continue its current level of spending?" "Without significant changes, perhaps 6 months, possibly less." Littlefinger's tone is matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. "The Iron Bank has been patient. But their patience has limits. Should they decide to call in their debts? The realm would face financial collapse, Tywin finishes, and with it, political chaos that would make Robert's rebellion look like a minor disturbance. Precisely, my lord. Before Tywin can respond, another figure appears in the doorway. Lord Varys, the Master of Whisperers, enters with the soft-footed grace that has earned him the nickname of the Spider. Completely bald and soft of body, dressed in silks and flowing robes that give him an almost feminine appearance, Varys seems harmless to those who do not know better. But Tywin recognizes the intelligence that gleams in the eunuch's dark eyes, the careful way he chooses his words, the subtle power that comes from knowing every secret in the Seven Kingdoms. "Lord Hand," Varys says, his voice as smooth as honey, "how good of you to request my presence so soon after your arrival. I do so hope I can be of service in these trying times." "Indeed you can," Tywin replies. "I understand that the investigation into Jon Arryn's death remains incomplete." A flicker of something crosses Varys's face. Caution, perhaps, or calculation. Sadly, yes. Poor Lord Jon fell ill so suddenly, and despite the efforts of Grand Maester Pycelle and the best healers in the city, nothing could be done to save him. A great tragedy for the realm. "Quite," Tywin says dryly. "And I suppose no evidence has emerged to suggest anything unnatural about his passing." "None whatsoever, my lord. Though, of course, if any such evidence were to surface, I would bring it to your attention immediately." Tywin studies the spider for a long moment, noting how Varys's hands remain perfectly still, despite the dangerous territory their conversation has entered. The man is either completely innocent or completely guilty, and in Tywin's experience, complete innocence is a luxury few can afford in King's Landing. "See that you do," Tywin says finally. "Now, both of you, I have changes to announce. Effective immediately, all major expenditures must be approved by this office. No tournaments, no feasts, no gifts or grants without my explicit consent." Littlefinger nods thoughtfully. "A wise policy, my lord, though it may prove unpopular with certain members of the court." "Let me worry about the court's happiness," Tywin replies coldly. "Your concern should be implementing these changes without causing undue disruption to necessary functions. Can you manage that?" "Of course, my lord. Though I might suggest that such dramatic changes be introduced gradually to avoid resistance." "What manner of resistance?" It is Varys who answers, his voice carefully neutral. His Grace has grown accustomed to a certain lifestyle, as have many of the great lords who frequent the capital. They may not appreciate sudden constraints on their activities. Tywin's smile is as sharp as a blade. "Then they will learn to appreciate them. The crown's survival depends on fiscal responsibility, and I will not allow sentiment to threaten the stability of the realm." He turns to Littlefinger. "Prepare a list of all current debts and their terms. I want to know exactly where we stand with each creditor." "It shall be done, my lord." "And Varys," Tywin continues, "I want a complete accounting of all information networks currently operating in the capital. Who reports to whom, what they watch, what they know. Everything." Varys's smile is blandly pleasant. "A considerable undertaking, my lord, but one I shall be delighted to begin immediately." As the two men depart, Tywin turns his attention back to the maps covering his desk. Each kingdom represents a different challenge, a different opportunity for consolidation of power. The Riverlands, torn between loyalty to the Tullys and resentment over the war's damages. The Vale, isolated and protective under Lysa Arryn's rule. The North, now more distant than ever, thanks to Ned Stark's refusal. The Reach, wealthy but politically fractured. Dorne, always dangerous and unpredictable. And then there is the West, his own domain, rich in gold and loyal to House Lannister above all others. From this position of strength, Tywin begins to plan how he will reshape the Seven Kingdoms to serve his family's interests. Within the fortnight, the changes begin to show. Where once the Red Keep buzzed with activity as courtiers planned elaborate entertainments and lords competed to display their wealth, now a grim efficiency prevails. Servants who once lived in comfortable sinecures find themselves working harder for less pay. Lords who expected generous gifts and subsidies discover that the royal treasury has suddenly become far less generous. Robert initially resists these changes, storming into Tywin's solar to demand explanations and exemptions. But Tywin's response is always the same: detailed financial projections showing exactly how the realm's debts will destroy them all if immediate action is not taken. Faced with numbers that even his wine-addled mind can comprehend, Robert grudgingly accepts his hand's policies, though his resentment grows with each passing day. "Let him hunt and whore as much as he likes," Tywin tells Kevin during one of their evening conferences, "as long as he does not interfere with the necessary work of governance." And if he decides to interfere anyway? Tywin's green eyes glitter with cold amusement. "Then we shall remind him that crowns are won and lost based on the strength of those who serve them. Robert's hammer gave him the throne, but it is Lannister gold that keeps him there." Meanwhile, in the throne room, where the Iron Throne squats like a great metal beast, Robert finds himself increasingly isolated. The lords who once flocked to his court now come seeking Tywin's favor instead, bringing their petitions to the hand rather than the king. The realization that he has become a figurehead in his own kingdom gnaws at Robert's pride, but he lacks the energy or focus to mount an effective challenge to his hand's growing authority. "Perhaps it is time for another royal progress," Queen Cersei suggests one evening as they dine together in the royal apartments. "A tour of the realm would remind the great lords of your grace's presence and authority." Robert waves dismissively. "Let Tywin handle the lords. I have no stomach for their bowing and scraping." He takes another drink of wine, his face flushed with alcohol and frustration. Besides, someone needs to remain here to ensure the Hand doesn't completely reorganize the kingdom while I'm gone. But even as he speaks, Robert knows the truth, that Tywin has already begun reorganizing the kingdom, and there is little he can do to stop it. The Golden Lion has claimed the Red Keep, as surely as if he had taken it by storm, and the realm bends to his will with the inexorable force of gravity. Far to the north, in the halls of Winterfell, Ned Stark reads the reports that arrive from the south with growing unease. The changes Tywin has implemented are sensible from a financial standpoint, but they represent a fundamental shift in how the realm operates. Where Robert had ruled through personal charisma and the loyalty of his friends, Tywin rules through calculation and the promise of rewards for those who serve faithfully. "He's consolidating power," Catelyn observes, as they discuss the latest news over their evening meal, "making himself indispensable while ensuring that all roads lead through him." "Aye," Ned agrees grimly, "and Robert seems content to let him do it, as long as the wine keeps flowing and the hunting is good." "Perhaps that is for the best," Catelyn says carefully. "A realm needs strong leadership, even if it comes from the Hand, rather than the king." But Ned's expression remains troubled. "The realm needs just leadership, not merely strong, and I fear that Tywin Lannister's definition of justice may not align with what the people deserve." As autumn deepens across the Seven Kingdoms, the new order settles into place like snow upon the ground. The Golden Lion flies proudly from the towers of King's Landing, and all who see it know that the age of Lannister has begun in earnest. What this means for the realm remains to be seen, but one thing is certain: the Game of Thrones has entered a new and dangerous phase, with stakes higher than ever before. In the west, the sun sets over Casterly Rock, painting the golden stone in shades of crimson and fire, and in the capital, Tywin Lannister works late into the night, surrounded by maps and ledgers and the tools of power, shaping the future of Westeros according to his own grand design. The granaries of Winterfell overflow with grain as the harvest season reaches its peak across the north. Wagons lumber through the castle gates from dawn to dusk, loaded with sacks of barley, oats, and wheat from the surrounding farmlands. In the vast storehouses beneath the keep, Ned Stark walks among towering piles of supplies, checking each inventory with the methodical care of a man who knows that winter's bite can mean death for those who are unprepared. "How much do we have stored?" he asks Poole, the castle's steward, whose ledger never seems to leave his hands during these busy weeks. "Enough to feed the castle and the winter town for 3 years, my lord, assuming a winter of normal length. If it proves to be a long winter." Poole's voice trails off, but Ned understands the implications. The Meisters at the Citadel speak of signs that suggest this winter may last longer than most. "Double our efforts," Ned commands. "Send word to every holdfast and village within 50 leagues. I want their surplus stored here at Winterfell. We'll pay fair prices, but I'll not see northern families starve because they held back grain for better offers." The steward bows and hurries away to carry out his lord's orders, while Ned continues his inspection of the preparations. Salt pork hangs in the smoking houses, barrels of ale and wine fill the cellars, and firewood stacks higher than a man's head in every courtyard. These are the unglamorous realities of leadership in the north. Not the grand tournaments and feasts that southern lords prefer, but the patient work of ensuring survival through the harsh months ahead. In the training yard, Robb Stark moves with the fluid grace of a natural swordsman, his blade singing through the air as he practices the forms Sir Roderick Castle has drilled into him since childhood. At 14, the heir to Winterfell has grown tall and strong, his auburn hair catching the autumn sunlight as he works through a complex sequence of cuts and parries. But today's lesson involves more than sword work. "Remember, my lord," Sir Roderick says, his voice carrying the authority of decades spent training young nobles. "A lord commands not just with his sword, but with his presence. The men must see strength in your bearing, confidence in your decisions." Around the training yard's edges, a dozen young men from northern houses watch Robb's every move. These are the sons of lords and knights who have come to Winterfell to learn the arts of war and leadership, but they are also Robb's future bannermen, and how they see him now will shape how they follow him in years to come. "Lord Karstark's son grows impatient," Robb observes quietly, nodding toward Haryon Karstark, whose dark eyes flash with barely contained ambition. "He thinks himself the better fighter." "Then give him the chance to prove it," Sir Roderick replies with a slight smile. "But remember, win or lose, you must do so with honor. A true lord lifts up those who serve him, even in defeat." Robb straightens his shoulders and calls out to Haryon, "Would you care to test your steel against mine?" "I could use the practice." The challenge is issued with exactly the right tone, confident but not arrogant, friendly but not familiar. Haryon's face lights up with eager acceptance, and soon the two young men circle each other with blunted steel while their companions gather to watch. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the God's Wood, Jon Snow sits beneath the heart tree with a leather-bound book in his lap, though his eyes remain fixed on the red leaves that drift down like drops of blood. At 14, Ned's bastard has grown into a serious young man, his dark hair and grey eyes marking him clearly as his father's son. But today, as always, the question of his place in the world weighs heavily upon his mind. "You look troubled, brother." Jon looks up to find Arya approaching through the trees, her hair wild from whatever adventure has occupied her morning. At 9 years old, his half-sister shows none of the ladylike graces that Septa Mordine tries constantly to instill in her, preferring instead to run wild through the castle like the wolf she is. "Not troubled," Jon says carefully, "just thinking." "About what?" Jon closes his book and considers his answer. How can he explain to a 9-year-old girl the growing sense that he no longer fits within the walls of Winterfell? That while Robb learns to command and lead, while Sansa dreams of marriage and motherhood, while Bran climbs ever higher toward his own destiny, Jon feels increasingly adrift, A bastard with no clear path forward? About the future, he says finally. About where I belong in the world. Arya settles beside him on the ground, heedless of the dirt that stains her dress. You belong here, with us. You're a Stark. Am I? Jon's voice carries no bitterness, only honest uncertainty. I bear the name Snow, not Stark. I'll inherit nothing, command no one. When Robb marries and has children of his own, what place will there be for me in Winterfell? Before Arya can answer, the sound of steel on steel rings through the Godswood, accompanied by shouts of encouragement from the training yard. Both siblings turn toward the noise, and Jon's expression grows thoughtful as he considers the paths that lie before him. In the Sept of Winterfell, Catelyn Stark kneels before the altar with a letter in her hands, its red wax seal bearing the trout of House Tully. The message brings news from Riverrun that fills her heart with both joy and worry. Her father grows frail, though he continues to govern the Riverlands with the wisdom that has earned him the title of Hoster the Great. Her brother Edmure shows promise as heir, but lacks their father's patience, while her uncle Brynden, called the Blackfish, continues to serve as Hoster's right hand, despite their old quarrels. "My lady," comes a soft voice from the doorway. Septa Mordane enters the Sept with her usual quiet dignity, her grey robes rustling softly as she moves. "I hope I do not intrude." "Not at all, Septa." Catelyn rises from her knees, folding the letter carefully. "I was just reading news from my family. My father sends his regards and asks after the children." "And how do they fare in your father's eyes?" "Well enough, though he worries about the approaching winter. The Riverlands have not seen such preparation since the war." Catelyn's voice grows thoughtful. "He asks if we might spare any grain from our stores, should the need arise. It is a delicate request. The Riverlands are rich and fertile, but they also support a larger population than the North. If Hoster Tully is already thinking about potential shortages, the coming winter may indeed prove harsher than expected. I shall speak with Lord Stark about it," Catelyn continues. "The North has always stood with the Riverlands when needed." The Septa nods approvingly. "A wise course, my lady. The bonds between great houses often prove more valuable than gold or grain." As if summoned by their conversation, young Sansa Stark appears in the doorway, her copper hair perfectly arranged, and her dress immaculate despite the morning's activities. At 11, Ned's eldest daughter shows every sign of growing into a great beauty, with her mother's blue eyes and the refined manners that mark her as a true lady. "Mother," Sansa says with a perfect curtsy, "Lady Dustin has arrived for her visit. She asks if you might receive her in the Solar." "Of course." Catelyn smooths her skirts and prepares to play the gracious hostess, though her mind remains on her father's letter and the implications of his request for aid. "Thank you, sweetling. How goes your needlework?" "Very well, mother. Septa Mordane says my stitching improves daily." "Excellent. Perhaps this afternoon you might play for our guest. She would enjoy hearing your harp." Sansa's face lights up with pleasure at the prospect of performing. Unlike Arya, who chafes at every lesson in ladylike behavior, Sansa embraces her role as a future lord's wife with enthusiasm and natural grace. In the yard behind the stables, a very different sort of lesson takes place. Arya Stark holds a slender wooden sword in her hands, her stance awkward but determined, as she faces a man unlike any other in Winterfell. Syrio Forel stands barely taller than Ned Stark, but his presence fills the practice space with quiet authority. The former First Sword of Braavos wears simple leather and wool suited to the northern climate, but his dark eyes miss nothing as he observes his young student's efforts. "No, little wolf," Syrio says in his distinctive accent, his voice carrying both patience and firmness. "You grip the sword like you would strangle a chicken. The blade must be part of your arm, not a tool you hold." Arya adjusts her grip, trying to mirror the fluid way Syrio handles his own practice sword. When Ned had written to the Free Cities, seeking the finest sword instructor for his daughter, Many had thought him mad for indulging Arya's wild nature. But Catelyn had surprised everyone by supporting the decision, recognizing that their youngest daughter would never be content with needlework and dancing alone. Better, Syrio acknowledges. Now what is the first rule of swordplay? Stick them with the pointy end, Arya ventures, earning a slight smile from her instructor. A good answer, but not complete. The first rule is to watch. See with your eyes. Yes, but also with your mind. Your enemy will tell you what he plans to do, if you know how to listen. He moves toward her with deliberate slowness, his wooden blade describing lazy circles in the air. Arya tenses, ready to defend against an attack that could come from any angle. Watch my feet, little wolf. Watch my shoulders. Watch how I breathe. The body cannot lie, even when the mind wishes to. The lesson continues as the autumn sun climbs higher, watched from various windows throughout the castle by family members and servants who have grown accustomed to Arya's unconventional education. In the Lord's Solar, Ned observes with approval as his daughter begins to understand the deadly dance of steel on steel. From the battlements above, Bran Stark watches the sword lesson while planning his next climbing adventure. At 7 years old, the fourth son of Winterfell has already earned a reputation as the best climber in the north, able to scale walls that would challenge grown men. Today, he studies the ancient stone of the first keep, looking for handholds that will let him reach the gargoyles perched high on its corners. "Bran!" Catelyn's voice carries clearly across the yard. "Come down from there this instant." But Bran has already found his route and begun his ascent, moving with the sure-footed confidence of a mountain cat. The servants who spot him no longer panic at the sight. They have learned that young Lord Brandon is more comfortable on the walls than on the ground, and that attempts to stop him only result in more creative climbing attempts. "Let him climb," Ned says quietly to his wife as they stand together in the yard. Better he learn his limits through practice than discover them in a moment of danger. "He'll break his neck one day," Catelyn mutters, but there is more worry than real anger in her voice. She knows her son too well to believe that mere scolding will keep him earthbound. Perhaps he'll find something up there that the rest of us cannot see from down here. As the day passes into evening, ravens arrive from the south, carrying news that dampens the peaceful atmosphere of Winterfell. The reports speak of changes in King's Landing that grow more troubling with each passing week. Lord Tywin's reforms have brought order to the capital's finances, but at a cost that extends far beyond mere gold. He's placed his own men in every position of authority, Ned reads from Maester Luwin's summary of the various reports. The City Watch answers to Ser Jaime now, the Treasury operates under Lannister supervision, and even the servants in the Red Keep have been replaced with people loyal to Casterly Rock. A careful man, Catelyn observes. He leaves nothing to chance. A dangerous man, Ned corrects. One who understands that power comes not from wearing a crown, but from controlling those who serve the crown. He sets the reports aside and moves to the window, gazing out over the lands that stretch north toward the wall. "I begin to think we made the right choice in staying here." "You begin to think?" Catelyn asks with a slight smile. "I was certain of it from the moment you refused Robert's offer." "Were you?" "I confess I've had moments of doubt. When I think of the realm under Tywin's rule, of what he might do without anyone to check his ambitions. Then you would have us all in King's Landing, where Tywin could check your ambitions just as easily?" Catelyn shakes her head. "No, husband. Better that the North remains strong and independent than that we sacrifice ourselves trying to moderate the unmoderatable." Outside their window, the first snow of the season begins to fall, dusting the castle walls and courtyard with white. Winter approaches Winterfell as it has for thousands of years, but this time the Starks will face it united, their strength gathered close around them like a wolf pack preparing to weather the storm. In the great hall, the family gathers for their evening meal as they have done every night since the royal visit ended. Robb speaks of his training and the lessons Sir Roderick has taught him about leadership. Sansa shares news of her needlework and the songs she has learned. Arya demonstrates a new grip Syrio has shown her, using her eating knife as a practice sword, until Catelyn gently corrects her. Bran describes the view from the top of the broken tower, and even little Rickon contributes his 3-year-old observations about the horses in the stable. Jon listens to it all with quiet attention, participating when asked, but maintaining the slight distance that marks his status as the bastard among them. Yet even as he struggles with questions of belonging and purpose, he cannot help but feel grateful for this moment of peace and family warmth. "Tomorrow we begin the final preparations for winter," Ned announces, as the meal draws to a close. "Every man, woman, and child in our care will have what they need to survive the cold months ahead. That is our duty as Starks, and our promise as Lords of Winterfell." The family disperses to their evening activities, Catelyn to her correspondence, Robb to study maps with Sir Roderick, Sansa to practice her harp, Arya to review sword forms in her chamber, and Bran to plan new climbing routes from his bedchamber window. Jon retreats to his own room, where books and candles wait to help him forget his worries for a few hours. As the night deepens over Winterfell, the castle settles into the familiar rhythms of northern life. Snow continues to fall beyond the walls, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howls its lonely song to the moon. But within the ancient keep, the Starks remain warm and safe, prepared for whatever winter may bring. In King's Landing, Tywin Lannister works late into the night, reshaping the realm according to his vision of order and control. But here in Winterfell, a different kind of strength grows. The strength of family bonds and northern resilience, the quiet power of wolves who know their territory and guard it well. The Game of Thrones continues to rage in the south, but the north remembers what truly matters when the storms of winter finally come calling. Across the narrow sea, in the vast Dothraki Sea, where grass stretches to the horizon beneath an endless sky, Daenerys Targaryen rides at the side of Khal Drogo with the bearing of a true Khaleesi. At 13 years old, the last daughter of the Dragon Kings has grown from the frightened girl who wed the savage horseman into something far more dangerous. A woman who commands respect through strength rather than fear. The great Khalasar moves like a living thing across the grasslands, 40,000 Dothraki warriors and their families following their khal toward the setting sun. Horses thunder across the steppes in clouds of dust, while the women and children travel in painted wooden cogs that creak and groan beneath the weight of plunder from a dozen conquered cities. At the head of this vast host, Daenerys sits astride her silver mare, with one hand resting on the swell of her belly, where the heir to the dragon throne grows within her womb. "The child moves strongly today," she says to Jorah Mormont, who rides beside her on a sturdy bay gelding. The exiled knight from Bear Island has become her most trusted advisor, his weathered face bearing the wisdom of years spent in foreign lands. Mirri Maz Duur says he will be a great warrior. "All Dothraki children are warriors, Khaleesi," Jorah replies, with the easy familiarity that has developed between them over the months of their journey. "But this child will be more than that. He will have the blood of Aegon the Conqueror and the fire of old Valyria in his veins." Behind them, the Khalasar spreads across the grasslands like a great brown tide. Blood riders with their long hair braided with bells ride in formation around their khal, while the warriors who follow them display their strength through the spoils they carry. Golden torques gleam on muscled arms, and captured swords hang from horsehair belts as trophies of conquest. This is power in its most primitive form, the strength of the sword and the loyalty of the tribe. But not all members of this great host have found their place in the Dothraki way of life. Viserys Targaryen stalks through the camp like a caged animal, his pale hair unkempt and his purple eyes burning with frustrated rage. The man who calls himself the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms wears silk that has grown threadbare and stained during the long months of travel, and his once handsome face bears the marks of too much wine and too little respect. "Sister," he calls as Daenerys dismounts near her tent, but his voice carries none of the authority he believes he possesses. "I would speak with you about our arrangement with the Khal. When does he mean to cross the narrow sea? When do we reclaim what is ours?" Daenerys turns to face her brother, noting how the Dothraki warriors nearby watch the exchange with thinly veiled contempt. Viserys has never understood that respect must be earned rather than demanded, and his failure to adapt to Dothraki culture has made him an object of mockery among the very people he expects to serve him. "The Khal will cross when he chooses to cross," Daenerys replies calmly. "The Dothraki do not follow timetables made by kings who rule over no one." Viserys' face flushes red with anger. "I am the dragon. I am the rightful king of Westeros, and these savages owe me their service." "You are my brother," Daenerys says quietly, her voice carrying a warning that Viserys is too proud to hear. "But here, in the sacred city of the Horse Lords, you are a guest who would do well to remember his place." The confrontation might have escalated, but Khal Drogo emerges from his tent with the silent grace of a predator. The great Khal stands nearly 7 feet tall, his copper skin gleaming with oil, and his long black hair braided with countless bells that ring softly with each movement. Scars mark his chest and arms like a map of the battles he has won, and his dark eyes miss nothing as they survey his domain. When Drogo's gaze falls upon Viserys, the Targaryen prince seems to shrink within his stained silks. The Khal speaks a few words in the harsh Dothraki tongue, and several of his blood riders laugh at whatever jest he has made. Viserys does not understand the words, but he knows mockery when he hears it, and his face grows even redder with rage. "What did he say?" Viserys demands of his sister, but Daenerys does not answer. Instead, she moves to Drogo's side, accepting the gentle touch of his massive hand upon her swollen belly with a smile that speaks of genuine affection. "He says the stallion who mounts the world grows strong," she tells her brother finally, "and that his son will ride where even the Khal himself has never been." That evening, as the Khalasar settles into its nightly camp with cookfires dotting the grassland like fallen stars, Jorah Mormont sits in his modest tent writing a letter that will never be sent. For months, he has maintained his correspondence with Varys in King's Landing, providing intelligence about the Targaryens and their movements across the Dothraki Sea. But tonight, he finds himself reluctant to commit his observations to paper. The truth is that Daenerys has surprised him. Where he expected to find the madness that ran in Targaryen blood, he has discovered strength and wisdom beyond her years. Where he thought to see a pawn in Viserys' Game of Thrones, he has found a young woman who commands respect from the fiercest warriors in the known world. The Khaleesi who speaks to him of fire and blood is not the same frightened girl who married Khal Drogo so many months ago. "She grows stronger each day," he writes, then stops to consider his words. How can he explain to the spider that Daenerys Targaryen is becoming something more than just another claimant to a distant throne? How can he describe the way the Dothraki look at her, not with the grudging respect they show to other Khaleesi, but with something approaching reverence? Jorah sets down his quill and stares at the half-finished letter. His instructions from King's Landing are clear. Watch the Targaryens, report their movements, and ensure that any threat to Robert's reign is eliminated before it can take root. But which king does he truly serve? The fat drunk who sits the Iron Throne, or the unborn child who might one day unite the Dothraki in conquest? Meanwhile, thousands of leagues to the west, those very reports sit unread on a desk in the Tower of the Hand. Tywin Lannister has more pressing concerns than the scattered remnants of a fallen dynasty. The realm's finances demand constant attention. The great lords require careful management, and the king himself grows more difficult to control with each passing day. "Another raven from Pentos," Kevin Lannister observes as he sorts through the day's correspondence. Something about Targaryen movements in the east. Tywin glances up from the tax records he has been reviewing, his green eyes showing no concern for distant threats. File it with the others. The Targaryens have been making promises and gathering sellswords for 17 years. If they possessed the power to threaten the realm, they would have done so by now. Still, perhaps we should maintain closer watch on their activities. Let Varys play with his spies and whispers, Tywin says dismissively. My concern is ensuring that the crown can afford to pay its debts, not chasing after shadows across the narrow sea. A beggar king with no ships, no gold, and no army poses no threat to anyone except himself. The Hand returns his attention to the ledgers before him, noting with satisfaction how his reforms have begun to show results. The crown's income has increased by nearly 20% since his appointment, while expenses have been cut by almost as much. Within a year, perhaps 2, the Iron Throne will be solvent again, a feat that seemed impossible when he first reviewed Robert's disastrous finances. In the royal apartments, King Robert Baratheon demonstrates exactly why such financial discipline proves necessary. The king sits in his chair with a cup of Dornish wine in his hand, listening with half an ear as a minor lord from the Stormlands petitions for funds to repair his castle's seawalls. The conversation bores Robert immensely, and his thoughts drift to the hunting trip he has planned for the following week. Your Grace, the lord continues desperately, the storms last winter caused considerable damage, and without repairs, the next winter may see my castle flooded. Yes, yes, Robert waves dismissively. Speak to the Hand about it. Lord Tywin handles such matters now. He takes another drink of wine, noting with irritation how the Stormlander's face falls. Surely you're not suggesting that the king himself should concern himself with every loose stone and leaking roof in the Seven Kingdoms? The Lord bows and withdraws, leaving Robert to his wine and his thoughts of the hunt. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he knows that his growing detachment from governance represents a failure of kingship. But the weight of the crown has grown heavier with each passing year, and the comfortable numbness of wine offers the only relief he can find from the constant demands of rule. A knock at the door interrupts his brooding. Enter, Robert commands, and Grand Maester Pycelle shuffles into the chamber with a small collection of scrolls in his gnarled hands. Your Grace, Pycelle begins in his querulous voice, the daily reports require your attention. There are matters of trade with the free cities, correspondence from the Night's Watch, and leave them with Tywin, Robert interrupts. The Hand speaks with my voice in all such matters. Of course, Your Grace, though there is one item that might interest you personally. Reports from across the narrow sea suggest that the last Targaryens continue to move among the Dothraki. Some sources indicate that the young woman has married one of their culls. Robert's eyes focus on the Grand Maester with sudden interest, though it is the interest of a man recalling an old grievance rather than a king assessing a new threat. Targaryen, you say? Which of the dragon's spawn still draws breath? Viserys, who styles himself king, and his sister Daenerys. The girl would be perhaps 13 or 14 years old now. Rhaegar's sister, Robert growls, his hand unconsciously moving to his warhammer where it hangs from his belt. I should have killed them all when I had the chance. Aerys, Rhaegar, and every dragon-blooded whelp in King's Landing. Indeed, Your Grace. Shall I have Lord Varys prepare a more detailed report? No, Robert says after a moment's consideration. Let them play at being king and queen in whatever foreign cesspit will have them. They're no threat to me, just the last gasps of a dead dynasty. Pycelle bows and withdraws, leaving Robert to his wine and his memories of the Trident, where he crushed Rhaegar Targaryen's chest with his hammer and won a crown. The king drinks deeply, washing away thoughts of distant threats with the familiar comfort of vintage that numbs both body and mind. Back in the Dothraki Sea, Daenerys stands beneath a canopy of stars, so brilliant they seem close enough to touch. Her hand rests on her belly, where the child who will be born, Rhaego, moves with increasing strength. Beside her, Khal Drogo speaks, in his harsh tongue, of the great raid they will conduct when they reach the Lazarene lands, of the wealth and slaves they will claim for their Khaleesi and her unborn son. But Daenerys' thoughts drift westward, toward the land her family once ruled, and the Iron Throne that should rightfully belong to her bloodline. Viserys speaks constantly of their return to Westeros, but his dreams are small things, crowns and castles, and the simple restoration of what was lost. Daenerys dreams of something far grander. Fire and blood, yes, but also justice and strength, the kind of rule that her ancestors achieved when they conquered the Seven Kingdoms with dragons and vision. "The call says we ride to Vice Dothrak soon," she tells Jorah as he approaches through the darkness, "to present our son to the Dosh Khaleen and receive their blessing." And after that, Khaleesi? Daenerys looks up at the stars, seeing in their cold light a future that stretches far beyond the grasslands of Essos. After that, we will see what the child brings us. Miri Maz-Dur speaks of prophecies, of stallions who will mount the world and princes who will be reborn. Perhaps it is time for the world to remember that dragons once ruled it all. Jorah follows her gaze to the star-filled sky, thinking of the letter he will not write and the loyalties that shift like sand beneath his feet. In King's Landing, spymasters and hands dismiss the Targaryen threat as the fantasy of powerless exiles. But here, beside the woman who commands the respect of 40,000 Dothraki warriors, Jorah knows better. The dragon sleeps across the narrow sea, but it stirs in its dreams of fire and conquest. And while the Iron Throne concerns itself with debts and harvests, and the mundane details of governance, something far more dangerous takes shape beneath the endless sky of the Dothraki Sea. The Game of Thrones continues in Westeros, but its most important pieces may be moving on a board that spans continents, one where the stakes are not just crowns and castles, but the very future of civilization itself. In her tent beneath the stars, Daenerys Stormborn sleeps and dreams of the dragons that dance in her blood, while her child grows strong within her womb, and destiny turns on the wheels of prophecy and desire. Soon the world will remember why men once feared the name Targaryen. But for now, the dragon rests, gathering strength for the fire that is to come. In the Tower of the Hand, where shadows dance between the flickering flames of a dozen candles, Petyr Baelish stands before Tywin Lannister's desk with a collection of ledgers balanced carefully in his arms. The Master of Coin has requested this private audience ostensibly to discuss the Crown's finances, but both men understand that their conversation will touch on matters far more subtle than gold and debt. "The reforms you have implemented show remarkable results, my lord." Littlefinger begins, his voice carrying the measured tone of a man who chooses each word for maximum effect. Tax revenues from the Crown lands have increased by 18%, while expenditures have been reduced by nearly a third. At this rate, the Crown will achieve solvency within 2 years. Tywin does not look up from the map he studies, his green eyes tracing the borders between kingdoms with the attention of a general planning a campaign. And the Iron Bank's position on our outstanding debts? Cautiously optimistic, they have agreed to restructure the payment schedule in light of our improved fiscal discipline. Littlefinger sets the ledgers on a side table and moves closer to the map, though they remain concerned about certain political uncertainties that might affect long-term stability. Now Tywin raises his eyes to study his Master of Coin. At 30 years old, Petyr Baelish possesses the kind of quick intelligence that makes men either invaluable allies or dangerous enemies. His ability to generate gold from seemingly empty coffers has proven essential to the Crown's recovery. But Tywin knows better than to trust a man whose loyalties shift like smoke in the wind. "What manner of uncertainties?" Tywin asks. "Questions about succession, primarily. King Robert grows older and more indulgent with each passing year, while Prince Joffrey remains young and untested. The bankers in Braavos prefer stability to youth when it comes to their investments. The observation hangs in the air between them like a blade waiting to fall. Both men know that Robert's health has declined noticeably since Tywin's appointment as Hand, his drinking heavier, and his attention to governance even more sporadic than before. The question of what happens when the crown passes to Joffrey represents the kind of long-term challenge that wise men prepare for in advance. The prince shows promise, Tywin says carefully. With proper guidance, he will grow into a capable ruler. Indeed, my lord, and who better to provide such guidance than his grandfather? Littlefinger's smile never quite reaches his eyes, though some might wonder how long such guidance will be, welcomed by the prince once he comes of age. Again, the words carry meanings that hover just beneath their surface. Tywin has spent months consolidating power in King's Landing, placing Lannister loyalists in key positions and ensuring that every important decision flows through his office. But such control depends on the cooperation of the king, or in Joffrey's case, the future king. A young ruler eager to assert his independence might prove less amenable to grandfatherly advice than his wine-soaked father. Children mature into wisdom when properly taught, Tywin replies. The prince will understand the value of experienced counsel. Of course, my lord, though experience suggests that young men often prefer the counsel of friends to that of family members. Littlefinger's tone remains perfectly neutral, but his meaning is clear. Joffrey will need advisers he trusts, and those advisers would be wise to cultivate relationships with him now, while he is still impressionable. Before Tywin can respond to this subtle overture, a soft knock interrupts their conversation. "Enter," the Hand commands, and Lord Varys glides into the chamber with his characteristic silence. "My lords," the Spider says in his honey-sweet voice, "I apologize for the interruption, but certain matters have arisen that require the Hand's attention." Tywin gestures for Varys to continue, noting how the eunuch's presence seems to make Littlefinger slightly uncomfortable. The relationship between the Master of Coin and the Master of Whisperers has always been one of wary cooperation, two players in the great game who understand each other's value while never quite trusting each other's motives. Reports from the Eastern Kingdoms speak of unusual activity among the Dothraki, Varys continues. My little birds suggest that the Targaryen girl has gained considerable influence over her barbarian husband. How considerable? Tywin asks, though his tone suggests limited interest in the activities of powerless exiles. Enough that some Pentoshi merchants have begun speaking of her as a potential threat to established trade routes. Nothing immediate, of course, but Varys spreads his soft hands in a gesture of uncertainty. In my experience, my lord, it is often wise to tend small fires before they become great conflagrations. Littlefinger interjects smoothly. Surely the Master of Whisperers does not suggest that a 13-year-old girl with no ships, no gold, and no army poses any serious threat to the Iron Throne. Not immediately, no, Varys concedes, but prophecies and legends have a way of attracting followers, particularly among the discontented, and there are always those who remember the Targaryen name with nostalgia. Tywin considers this information with the dispassionate calculation that has served him well throughout his political career. The Targaryens represent a potential threat, but a distant one, while the immediate challenges of governing the Seven Kingdoms demand constant attention. Resources spent chasing shadows in Essos are resources not available for more pressing concerns. Continue monitoring the situation, he commands finally. But I will not divert significant resources to address threats that may never materialize. The realm faces more immediate challenges than the fantasies of exiled children. Varys bows his head in acceptance, though keen observers might notice how his eyes remain troubled. The Spider has survived decades in King's Landing by anticipating threats before they become visible to others, and his instincts whisper warnings about dangers gathering beyond the narrow sea. There is another matter, my lord, Varys continues. The investigation into Lord John Arryn's death has reached something of an impasse. Without new evidence or witnesses, I fear we have learned all we are likely to learn about that tragic event. This pronouncement draws sharp looks from both Tywin and Littlefinger, though for different reasons. The hand's expression remains carefully neutral, while the Master of Coin's quick intelligence works to assess the implications of this development. "You are satisfied that no foul play was involved?" Tywin asks. The evidence suggests that Lord John fell victim to a sudden illness, possibly brought on by the stresses of his position. Grand Maester Pycelle concurs with this assessment. Varys's tone carries the weight of official conclusion, though something in his manner suggests unspoken reservations. "Then let the matter rest," Tywin decides. "Lord John served the realm faithfully for 17 years. His memory deserves peace, not endless speculation about mysteries that cannot be solved." As the spider withdraws with another bow, Littlefinger remains behind, his grey-green eyes bright with calculation. The conversation has revealed much about the new power structure in King's Landing, Tywin's focus on immediate, practical concerns, Varys's diminished influence over policy decisions, and the careful way certain topics are allowed to fade into official silence. "A wise decision, my lord," Littlefinger observes. "Some stones are better left unturned, particularly when turning them serves no useful purpose." "Indeed. Now, about those payment schedules you mentioned." Meanwhile, hundreds of leagues to the east in the Vale of Arryn, Lysa Arryn paces the floor of her solar in the Eyrie like a caged bird. Lady Regent of the Vale since her husband's death, she rules from the ancient seat of House Arryn with an iron hand that grows tighter with each passing month. Her son Robert, called Robin by those who know him well, plays with his toys in the corner, while his mother wrestles with fears that give her no peace. "Maester Coleman," she calls to the elderly man, who serves as the Aerie's healer and counsellor. "Have any ravens arrived from the capital today?" "None, my lady, as has been the case for several days now." The Maester's voice carries gentle concern for his lady's state of mind. Since Lord John's death, Lady Lysa has grown increasingly anxious about communications from King's Landing, reading threats into every delay and conspiracy into every silence. "They know," she whispers, though whether she speaks to the Maester or to herself remains unclear. Somehow they know what happened. Why else would they stop writing? Why else would they leave us in such silence? "My lady, perhaps the new hand simply has more pressing concerns than the daily governance of the Vale. Lord Tywin is said to be a man who focuses on immediate problems rather than distant ones." But Lysa shakes her head, her long auburn hair falling around her face like a curtain. "You don't understand. John was asking questions before he died, dangerous questions about dangerous people. And now they rule in King's Landing while we sit here like mice in a trap." The fear that drives Lysa's paranoia is not entirely unfounded. She knows what she did, and she knows why she did it. The letter she sent to her sister in Winterfell, warning of Lannister treachery, was meant to protect her son from those who might use him as a political pawn. But it was also meant to hide the truth about Jon's death, a truth that could destroy not just House Arryn, but the carefully constructed lie that keeps Petyr Baelish's various schemes from unraveling. "Perhaps," she says finally, "it is time to strengthen the Aerie's defences, double the guards on the Bloody Gate, restrict access to the castle, and send word to the Lords of the Vale. They should know that external threats may require their attention." Maester Coleman frowns at these commands, recognizing the signs of growing isolation that could cut the Vale off from the rest of the realm. "My lady, such measures might be seen as provocative by the Crown. If Lord Tywin believes the Vale is preparing for resistance, let him think what he likes," Lysa snaps. "The Vale has always been independent. We defended ourselves against the mountain clans when the kings in King's Landing offered no help. We can defend ourselves against any threat, foreign or domestic. As autumn deepens across the Seven Kingdoms, the seeds of future conflicts take root in the shadows and whispers of political calculation. In King's Landing, Tywin Lannister consolidates power, while dangerous secrets remain buried beneath layers of official silence. In the Vale, fear drives Lady Lysa toward an isolation that serves no one's interests, save those who profit from confusion and discord. And in the quiet moments between official business and public ceremony, Cersei Lannister finds herself in the company of her twin brother Jaime, their golden heads close together as they whisper of matters that could topple kingdoms if spoken aloud. "Father grows stronger every day," Cersei observes as they stand together in the castle's godswood, where ancient trees provide cover from prying eyes and listening ears. Robert defers to him in all things, and the small council follows his lead without question. "As it should be," Jaime replies, his green eyes scanning the trees for any sign of observers. Father understands power in ways that Robert never did. The realm grows stronger under his guidance. And Joffrey? Learns well. Father has begun including him in certain meetings, teaching him the arts of governance and the importance of strength. Jaime's voice carries pride for his son, though neither sibling speaks that truth aloud, even here in their private moments. Good. The boy will need every advantage when his time comes. Cersei's expression grows thoughtful as she considers the future. Though I sometimes wonder if we have been too careful, too cautious in our discretion. Caution has kept us alive and our children safe, Jaime reminds her. Father's protection is valuable, but it depends on maintaining certain appearances. Scandal would serve no one's interests. They speak in careful euphemisms even when alone, a habit born of years spent guarding secrets that could destroy them all. The truth about Joffrey's parentage remains locked away in their hearts, protected by lies and assumptions that grow stronger with each passing year. Even Tywin, for all his political brilliance, sees only what he expects to see. A golden-haired grandson who will one day rule the Seven Kingdoms in the Lannister name. But truth has a way of surfacing, despite the best efforts to bury it. In the Red Keep's libraries, ancient books speak of bloodlines and inheritance, of the signs that mark true kings, and the curses that follow false ones. And in the city below, sharp-eyed observers note resemblances and whisper questions that grow harder to dismiss with each passing season. The Game of Thrones continues beneath the surface of courtly politics, played by masters who understand that information is the most valuable currency in the realm. Some players, like Tywin and Cersei, believe they control the flow of dangerous truths. Others, like Varys and Littlefinger, understand that secrets have lives of their own, growing stronger in the darkness until they burst forth to reshape the world. Winter approaches King's Landing as it does the rest of the realm, but the cold that settles over the capital comes not from the changing seasons, but from the calculating hearts of those who rule from the shadows. The Iron Throne sits empty more often than not these days, while the real power gathers in the Tower of the Hand, where golden lions plan for a future built on foundations of hidden truth and buried lies. Soon, the realm will learn whether such foundations can support the weight of a dynasty, or whether they will crumble when the storms of revelation finally come calling. The great hall of Winterfell fills with the deep voices of northern lords as autumn gives way to the first breath of winter. Outside the ancient walls, snow falls steadily from a grey sky, blanketing the godswood and courtyard in white that speaks of the long, cold months ahead. But inside, where banners hang from stone walls and torches cast dancing shadows, the assembled lords of the north gather to discuss matters that run deeper than weather or harvest. Jon Umber, called the Great John for his massive frame and booming voice, stands before the high table where Ned Stark sits in his lord's chair. At nearly 7 feet tall and broad as a bull, the Lord of Last Hearth commands attention through presence alone, his wild black hair and beard making him look more like a giant from the old stories than a civilized lord. But his dark eyes gleam with sharp intelligence as he speaks of the concerns that brought him south from his holdings near the wall. "The ravens speak of troubling news from the capital, my lord," the great John rumbles, his voice carrying easily through the hall. This Lannister hand consolidates power like a man preparing for war, not peace. He places his own men in every position of authority, controls every coin that enters or leaves the royal treasury, and treats the other kingdoms like conquered territories rather than willing allies. Murmurs of agreement ripple through the assembled lords, their weathered faces reflecting shared concerns about the changes taking place hundreds of leagues to the south. These are men who remember Robert's rebellion, who fought beside Ned Stark to place a just king on the Iron Throne. The idea that their sacrifices have led to Lannister dominance sits poorly with warriors who value honor above gold. Lord Tywin's reforms have brought stability to the Crown's finances, Ned replies carefully, though his tone suggests little enthusiasm for defending the Hand's methods. The realm was drowning in debt before his appointment. Aye, and now it drowns in Lannister influence instead, declares Lady Maege Mormont, her gruff voice cutting through the diplomatically worded response. The ruler of Bear Island stands barely 5 feet tall, but her presence fills the hall like that of a much larger person. Grey-haired and steel-eyed, she has governed her island holdings with an iron hand for decades, earning the respect of every lord in the north through her fierce independence and unwavering loyalty to House Stark. "Tell them what your men found," Maege urges Robert Glover, Lord of Deepwood Motte, whose weathered face bears the marks of years spent defending the northern forests from ironborn raiders and wildling incursions. Lady Maege nods grimly and steps forward. 3 weeks past, my men caught strangers asking questions on Bear Island, southerners by their speech and manner claiming to be merchants interested in our timber exports. But merchants don't usually carry hidden weapons or ask detailed questions about our defenses and the movements of our longships. The revelation sends a chill through the hall that has nothing to do with the winter weather outside. For generations, the North has enjoyed a degree of autonomy that allowed its lords to govern their lands without interference from the South. The idea that King's Landing now sends spies to monitor northern activities represents a fundamental shift in the relationship between the Iron Throne and its most distant kingdom. "What happened to these merchants?" asks Rickard Karstark, Lord of Carhold, whose stern face reflects the gravity of the situation. "They suffered accidents," Lady Maege replies with grim satisfaction. "The sort that happen to men who wander too close to dangerous waters in winter weather. The crabs will feast well this season." Several lords chuckle at this pronouncement, though their amusement carries an edge of menace that speaks to northern justice. In the south, such matters might be handled with formal protocols and diplomatic niceties. In the north, threats to family and holdings are dealt with more directly. "The question remains," interjects Wyman Manderley, whose massive frame makes even the Great John look modest by comparison, whether these were isolated incidents or signs of a larger policy. If the new hand believes the North requires closer supervision, we may face challenges that go far beyond a few misguided spies. Lord Manderley's concerns carry particular weight due to White Harbour's position as the North's primary trading port. If anyone would notice changes in southern attitudes toward northern independence, it would be the lord whose city handles the bulk of trade between the kingdoms. "What do you counsel, my lord?" asks Galbart Glover, Robert's younger brother, whose holdings at Deepwood Motte have made him expert in defending against external threats. "How should we respond to this attention from the capital?" All eyes turn to Ned Stark, who sits quietly in his chair, weathered hands folded before him as he considers the weight of his bannermen's concerns. The decision to refuse Robert's offer has protected his family, but it has also created new challenges that require careful navigation. The North has always maintained its independence through strength and unity, but those qualities must be demonstrated rather than assumed. "Tell me your thoughts plainly," Ned says finally. "What do you fear, and what do you propose we do about it?" The Greatjon speaks first, his voice carrying the bluntness that has made him legendary throughout the North. "I fear that this Lannister hand sees the North as a problem to be solved rather than an ally to be respected. We refused to send you south to serve in his court, and that refusal marks us as potential enemies in the eyes of men who trust only those they can control. And I fear," adds Lady Mage, "that our traditional freedoms may be seen as obstacles to the kind of centralized control that Lord Tywin appears to favor. A man who places his own people in every position of power in King's Landing might eventually decide that northern lordships require similar supervision." Murmurs of agreement echo through the hall, accompanied by the sound of hands moving unconsciously to sword hilts. These are not men who submit easily to outside authority, and the idea of Lannister appointees governing northern holdings strikes at the heart of everything they believe about honor and independence. "What would you have me do?" Ned asks, though his tone suggests he already knows the direction their council will take. "Prepare," says Rickard Karstark simply. "Not for war, necessarily, but for the possibility that our interests and the Crown's interests may not always align. Ensure that the North can stand on its own, if necessary. Strengthen our ties with each other," suggests Robert Glover. "Regular meetings, shared intelligence about Southern activities, coordination of our responses to whatever challenges may arise. And most importantly," adds the Greatjon with characteristic directness, "make it clear to anyone who asks that the North remembers its friends and its enemies. Let the Lannisters know that we are not sheep to be herded at their convenience." From her place beside Ned's chair, Catelyn observes the discussion with the shrewd political instincts inherited from her Tully upbringing. These lords speak of legitimate concerns, but they also dance around the edges of something more dangerous, the kind of separatist thinking that could lead to open rebellion if not carefully managed. "May I speak, my lord?" she asks, and Ned nods his permission. "My lords," Catelyn begins, her voice carrying the diplomatic skills learned in her father's halls at River Run. "Your concerns are well-founded, and your loyalty to House Stark is beyond question. But we must be careful not to let fear drive us toward actions that could be interpreted as disloyalty to the Crown." Several lords bristle at this suggestion, but Catelyn continues before they can object. "I do not counsel weakness or submission. Rather, I suggest that we frame our actions in terms of northern self-reliance rather than southern resistance. The North has always been expected to defend itself against wildlings, against ironborn raiders, against the harsh realities of winter weather. No one in King's Landing can object to us doing what we have always done." "What do you propose, my lady?" asks Lord Manderley, his shrewd eyes recognizing the political wisdom in her words. "Regular meetings of northern lords to discuss mutual defense and trade cooperation. Joint training exercises for our armies, ostensibly to prepare for wildling threats. Increased patrols along our coastlines to watch for ironborn activity. And closer coordination of our intelligence networks to monitor threats from all directions, including the south." The brilliance of this approach becomes immediately apparent to the assembled lords. By framing their preparations as responses to traditional northern threats, they can achieve everything they desire while maintaining the appearance of loyalty to the Iron Throne. Southern observers might note increased military activity in the north, but they would find it difficult to characterize such preparations as treasonous. "The lady speaks wisdom," declares the Greatjon with obvious approval. "Let the Lannisters waste their time spying on preparations they cannot reasonably object to. And if those preparations serve multiple purposes," adds Lady Mage with a grim smile, "well, that is simply good lordship." As the discussion continues, Robb Stark listens from his place at the high table, absorbing lessons in leadership that no Maester's teaching could provide. At 14 years old, the heir to Winterfell, watches how his father navigates the complex currents of lordly politics, balancing competing interests while maintaining the unity that makes the North strong. "There is another matter we must consider," Ned says, as the conversation begins to wind down. "Winter approaches, and our first responsibility must always be to ensure that our people survive the cold months ahead. Whatever preparations we make for political challenges, we cannot allow them to interfere with the practical work of stockpiling food and fuel." This reminder brings murmurs of agreement from lords who understand that northern politics always operates within the context of harsh, natural realities. The Game of Thrones may rage in King's Landing, but in the north, survival depends on preparation and cooperation rather than scheming and betrayal. "How do we coordinate these efforts?" asks Galbart Glover. "Regular ravens can be intercepted, and large gatherings of lords might attract unwanted attention." "Quietly," Catelyn suggests. "Trade visits between holdings, family gatherings for name days and weddings, hunting parties that happen to cross multiple territories. The North has always conducted its business through personal relationships rather than formal protocols." "And Wintertown," adds Maester Lewin, who has remained silent throughout the discussion, but now offers his scholarly perspective. "The craftsmen and merchants who gather there for the cold months provide natural opportunities for communication that would attract no notice from southern observers." As the evening progresses, the assembled lords reach a consensus that speaks to both their unity and their wisdom. The North will prepare for whatever challenges may come, but it will do so in ways that honor both their traditions and their obligations to the Iron Throne. They will strengthen their defenses while maintaining their loyalty, coordinate their responses while avoiding the appearance of conspiracy. "Then we are agreed," Ned declares as the formal discussion draws to a close. "The North will stand together, as it always has. We will prepare for winter, defend our lands, and protect our people. If the Crown requires more than that from us, we will decide our response when the time comes." The lords rise from their seats with the satisfaction of men who have reached difficult decisions through honest discussion and mutual respect. Some will remain at Winterfell for a few more days, conducting the informal conversations that will flesh out the details of their cooperation. Others will depart immediately for their own holdings, carrying word of the evening's discussions to bannermen who could not make the journey to Winterfell, but all leave with a clearer understanding of where they stand and what they must do. The North remembers, and the North prepares. Whatever storms may come from the south, the wolves of Winterfell will face them with the strength that comes from unity and the wisdom that comes from understanding their true interests. Outside the Great Hall, snow continues to fall across the ancient castle, blanketing the walls and towers in white that speaks of the long winter ahead. But within those walls, the lords of the North have taken the first steps toward ensuring that their people will survive whatever challenges await them, whether those challenges come from winter weather or southern politics. The Game of Thrones continues to rage across the Seven Kingdoms, but in the North, a different game begins, one played not for crowns and gold, but for survival and independence. And in that game, the stakes are nothing less than the right to remain true to the values that have defined the North for thousands of years. Winter is coming to Westeros, but the North will be ready. The throne room of the Red Keep echoes with the angry voices of lords who have journeyed from across the Seven Kingdoms to protest the Crown's new policies. Before the Iron Throne, where King Robert sits with obvious discomfort, a line of petitioners stretches nearly to the great doors, each bearing grievances that grow more serious with each passing day. The king's face shows the strain of listening to complaints he does not fully understand about policies he had no hand in creating. "Your Grace," declares Lord Titos Blackwood of Raventree Hall, his weathered face flushed with indignation. "The new taxes imposed on river crossings have made trade along the Trident nearly impossible. Merchants who once brought prosperity to the Riverlands now seek routes through other kingdoms to avoid the crown's fees. Robert shifts uncomfortably on the iron seat, glancing toward the Tower of the Hand, where he knows Tywin Lannister waits with ledgers and explanations for every policy being protested. The king understands war and hunting and the weight of his hammer, but the complexities of taxation and trade regulations might as well be written in High Valyrian for all the sense they make to him. "The Hand assures me these measures are necessary to restore the crown's finances," Robert says with little conviction. "The realm was drowning in debt before Lord Tywin's appointment." "Aye, your grace. But now the Riverlands drown instead," replies Lord Blackwood with barely concealed anger. "Our farmers cannot afford to transport their grain to market. Our craftsmen find no buyers for their goods, and our merchants speak of abandoning the river trade entirely." Behind Lord Blackwood, other Riverlands lords nod their agreement, their faces reflecting the economic hardship that has settled over their lands like a plague. The irony is not lost on them that the crown's financial recovery comes at the cost of the very prosperity that should provide its foundation. From his place beside the Iron Throne, Grand Maester Pycelle observes the proceedings with growing unease. In his decades of service to the crown, he has seen many kings struggle with the demands of governance, but never has he witnessed such systematic resistance to royal policy. The complaints come not from rebellious vassals or ambitious rivals, but from loyal lords whose patience has been strained beyond its limits. "Perhaps your grace might consider adjustments to these policies," Pycelle suggests carefully. "Modifications that might address the Lord's concerns while maintaining the fiscal discipline that Lord Tywin deems necessary." But before Robert can respond, the great doors open to admit Tywin Lannister himself, resplendent in crimson and gold, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere in the throne room. The Hand's green eyes sweep over the assembled lords with the calculating gaze of a man who sees problems to be solved rather than grievances to be addressed. "Your Grace," Tywin says with a formal bow, "I understand there are concerns about the implementation of our financial reforms. Perhaps I might address these matters directly." The Riverlands lords turn to face the Hand with expressions that range from hopeful to hostile. They know Tywin's reputation for competence and decisiveness, but they also know that his primary concern lies with Lannister interests rather than the welfare of other kingdoms. Lord Blackwood raises valid points about trade disruption, Tywin acknowledges, his tone suggesting that he has already considered and dismissed these concerns. However, the crown's survival depends on restoring fiscal discipline to all aspects of governance. Temporary hardship in some regions is preferable to the collapse of royal authority throughout the realm. "Temporary?" Lord Blackwood's voice carries disbelief. "My Lord Hand, these policies threaten to destroy trade relationships that have existed for centuries. The damage cannot be easily repaired once merchants find alternative routes." "Then those merchants will learn to adapt to the new reality," Tywin replies coldly. "The realm cannot afford to subsidize inefficient trade practices simply because they have historical precedent." The exchange illustrates perfectly the growing divide between Lannister pragmatism and regional concerns. Tywin sees numbers and systems where the lords see communities and livelihoods, leading to policies that appear sensible on parchment but prove devastating in practice. Meanwhile, in the great sept of Baelor, a different kind of resistance takes shape. The High Septon, a portly man whose simple robes belie his growing political influence, addresses a gathering of septons and septors who have come to the capital from across the Seven Kingdoms. Their faces reflect the same concerns voiced by the secular lords, but their grievances run deeper than mere economic hardship. "Brothers and sisters," the High Septon intones, his voice carrying easily through the vast space of the sept, "we gather in troubled times. The crown that should protect the faith instead enables its corruption, while those who should serve the Seven pursue only gold and power. Murmurs of agreement ripple through the assembled clergy, their voices creating a low rumble that speaks to widespread discontent. Since Tywin's appointment as Hand, the Crown's policies have shown little regard for religious concerns, treating the faith as merely another institution to be managed rather than the spiritual foundation of the realm. "What would you have us do, Your Holiness?" asks a scepter, whose weathered face bears the marks of years spent ministering to the poor in Flea Bottom. The people suffer under the weight of new taxes, while the court grows ever more extravagant in its displays of wealth. We must remember our duties to the Seven and to the innocent who look to us for guidance, the High Septon replies. If the Crown will not protect the faithful, then the faithful must learn to protect themselves. The implications of this statement are not lost on anyone present. Throughout the history of Westeros, conflicts between the faith and the Crown have led to bloodshed and civil war. The idea that religious leaders might once again take up arms in defense of their beliefs represents a return to darker times. Far to the south on Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon paces the chambers of his ancestral seat like a caged animal, his jaw clenched with the frustrated rage that has defined his relationship with his older brother's reign. The Lord of Dragonstone has grown increasingly vocal in his criticism of Robert's kingship, though his complaints now focus as much on the Hand's policies as on the king's failings. "Look at this!" Stannis snarls, throwing a scroll across the room where it strikes the stone wall and falls to the floor. "Another royal decree bearing my brother's seal, but written in Tywin Lannister's hand. Robert has become a puppet, dancing to golden strings." Sir Davos Seaworth, the former smuggler who serves as Stannis' most trusted advisor, retrieves the scroll and scans its contents with the careful attention of a man who understands the weight of words on parchment. What he finds there confirms his lord's assessment: policies that serve Lannister interests while cloaking themselves in royal authority. "The Hand grows bold, my lord," Davos observes. "These new trade agreements heavily favor Casterly Rock and Lannisport while penalizing ports in other kingdoms. It's as if he views the realm as his personal treasury." "Because that is exactly how he views it," Stannis replies with bitter certainty. "My brother won his crown through strength of arms, but he lacks the strength of will to actually wear it. Instead, he allows Tywin Lannister to rule in his name while he drowns his failures in wine and whores." The conversation is interrupted by the arrival of Maester Cresson, whose aged face shows concern for his lord's growing agitation. The old man has served House Baratheon for decades, watching young Stannis grow into a man of rigid principles and uncompromising justice. "My lord," Cresson says carefully, "ravens have arrived from Storm's End. Your brother Renly requests your presence for discussions about mutual concerns regarding the Crown's recent policies." Stannis turns sharply to study his maester's expression, recognizing the coded language that suggests treasonous conversations. Renly has always been more politician than warrior, more interested in charm and popularity than duty and justice. But if even the youngest Baratheon brother has begun to question Robert's reign, the implications are serious indeed. "What does Renly want?" Stannis asks bluntly. The message speaks of gathering support among the Stormlords and Lords of the Reach. Cresson replies reluctantly. "It seems your brother believes the time has come for concerned family members to take a more active role in governance." The suggestion hangs in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Both men understand that Renly's invitation represents the first step toward open rebellion, couched in language that maintains plausible deniability while testing Stannis' willingness to act against his brother. "And what does my conscience say about this invitation?" Stannis asks himself more than his advisors. The eldest Baratheon brother has always struggled with questions of loyalty and duty, torn between his obligations to Robert and his growing conviction that the realm suffers under weak leadership. In the Reach, similar conversations take place in the rose-covered halls of Highgarden. Lord Mace Tyrell, the Lord Paramount of the Reach, sits in his solar surrounded by ledgers that tell a troubling story about the Crown's new trade policies. The richest agricultural region in the Seven Kingdoms finds itself increasingly penalized by regulations that favor Lannister gold over Tyrell grain. "Father," says Sir Loras Tyrell, the Knight of Flowers whose beauty and skill at arms have made him famous throughout the realm, "the younger lords grow restless. They speak openly of the Crown's favoritism toward the Westerlands, and wonder why the Reach should continue to support policies that impoverish our lands." Lord Mace nods thoughtfully, his round face reflecting the political calculations that have kept House Tyrell powerful for generations. The Roses of Highgarden have always been careful gardeners, nurturing alliances that bloom when conditions prove favorable, while pruning connections that threaten their prosperity. "What news from court?" he asks his son, knowing that Loras maintains connections throughout King's Landing through his friendships with other young nobles. "Prince Renly has been particularly active in recent weeks," Loras replies, a slight flush colouring his cheeks at the mention of the youngest Baratheon. He speaks to many lords about the need for new leadership in the realm, though he is careful never to mention the king directly. The implications are clear to both men. Renly Baratheon, with his charm and political skill, has begun building the kind of coalition that could challenge the current order. His youth and popularity among the younger generation of nobles makes him an attractive alternative to both Robert's weakness and Stannis's harshness. Meanwhile, hundreds of leagues to the north, ravens arrive at Winterfell, bearing news that confirms Catelyn Stark's darkest fears about southern politics. In her solar, surrounded by letters from family and allies throughout the realm, she reads reports of unrest that grow more troubling with each delivery. "The Riverlands struggle under the weight of new taxes," she tells Ned, as they review the correspondence together. "My uncle Brynden writes that trade along the Trident has declined by half since the Crown implemented its new policies." Ned's expression grows grim as he considers the implications. The Riverlands have always been the crossroads of Westeros, their prosperity dependent on trade and commerce. Policies that cripple their economy threaten the stability of the entire realm. "And the faith?" he asks, remembering Catelyn's warnings about religious unrest. Growing more militant by the day, the High Septon speaks openly of corruption in King's Landing and the need for the faithful to defend themselves against secular tyranny. Catelyn sets down another letter with obvious concern. "I fear we may see a return to the days of the faith militant if these trends continue." The reference sends a chill through both Starks, who know their history well enough to understand the implications. When the faith takes up arms against the Crown, the results are always catastrophic, tearing the realm apart in wars that pit brother against brother and father against son. "Your counsel proves wise once again," Ned says quietly. "Had I accepted Robert's offer to serve as hand, our family would be trapped in the center of this growing storm. Instead, the storm gathers while we remain safe in the north," Catelyn replies. "But storms have a way of spreading, even to places that seem far from their center. We must remain vigilant and prepare for whatever winds may blow our way." Outside their window, snow falls steadily across the Godswood, covering the ancient trees in white that speaks of the long winter ahead. But the cold that threatens Winterfell may prove less dangerous than the political winter that settles over the Seven Kingdoms, where the seeds of civil war take root in the fertile soil of resentment and oppression. Tywin Lannister's golden efficiency has brought order to the Crown's finances, but it has also created the very instability it sought to prevent. In trying to control every aspect of governance, the Hand has pushed the realm's lords beyond their breaking point, creating the conditions for the kind of rebellion that topples dynasties and reshapes kingdoms. The Game of Thrones continues, but now it plays out on a board where the pieces move toward inevitable conflict, driven by forces that even the most calculating players struggle to control. In the vast Dothraki Sea, where the grass stretches endlessly beneath a sky the color of old bronze, Khal Drogo lies dying on a bed of furs, while his Khaleesi holds vigil beside him. The great Khaal's copper skin burns with fever, his massive frame racked by infections that spread from wounds sustained in the brutal fighting against a rival Khalasar. Even the strongest horses eventually fall, and the stallion who once seemed immortal now struggles for each labored breath. Daenerys Targaryen, no longer the frightened girl who wed the savage horseman, but a woman forged by fire and loss, watches her husband suffering with eyes that have learned to see beyond immediate pain to distant possibilities. At 14 years old, she has already buried the child that grew within her womb, lost to the same conflicts that now claim Drogo's life. But in her hands rest 3 dragon eggs, ancient stone that pulses with warmth that has nothing to do with the fever that consumes her dying husband. "Khaleesi," whispers Jorah Mormont from his place beside the tent's entrance, his weathered face etched with concern for the woman he has grown to love beyond all reason or hope. The Blood Riders speak of choices that must be made. When the call dies, the Khalasar will fragment. You must decide where your path leads. Daenerys does not lift her eyes from Drogo's face, though she hears the weight behind Jorah's words. Dothraki custom demands that a Khale's widow retreat to Vaes Dothrak to live among the crones who speak prophecy and remember the ancient days. But custom has never bound the blood of the dragon, and tonight, as stars wheel overhead in patterns that seem to spell out destiny, Daenerys feels the stirring of something far older than Dothraki law. "Tell me about the dragons, Sir Jorah," she says quietly, her fingers tracing the smooth surface of the largest egg, its black shell shot through with veins of deep red. "Tell me about fire-made flesh." Jorah's expression grows troubled, recognizing the dangerous direction of her thoughts. "Dragons are gone from the world, Khaleesi. They died out more than a century ago, and no power can bring them back." "Can it not?" Daenerys rises from beside Drogo's bed and moves to where her dragon eggs rest in their place of honor, each one cradled in silk and gold. The black egg with its red veins, the green egg with its bronze highlights, the cream-colored egg that seems to glow with inner light, wedding gifts from Illyrio Mopatis that have traveled with her across the Dothraki Sea like silent promises waiting to be fulfilled. "I dream of them," she continues, her voice carrying the certainty of one who has seen visions in the flames. 3 dragons dancing in the sky, their shadows falling across the 7 kingdoms like harbingers of change. I dream of fire that burns away the false and leaves only truth. Before Jorah can respond, Drogo's breathing changes, becoming shallow and erratic. The great Khale's eyes open one final time, looking past his Khaleesi towards something only he can see. Then his massive chest falls still and doesn't rise again. The stallion who mounted the world has fallen at last, leaving behind a Khaleesi whose true journey has only just begun. The rituals that follow Drogo's death proceed according to ancient custom, though Daenerys shapes them to her own purposes with the subtle authority she has learned to wield. The funeral pyre rises like a wooden mountain on the grassland, constructed from the wagons and possessions that once marked the Khalasar's wealth and power. Drogo's body lies atop this monument to his life, dressed in the silk and gold befitting a great call, his arak gleaming in his lifeless hands. "The eggs!" Daenerys commands, as the sun sets behind the pyre, painting the sky in shades of fire and blood. "Place them beside him. Let the Khal carry them to the Nightlands so that they might hatch in the realm of spirits." Her followers exchange uncertain glances, understanding neither the significance of her request nor the dangerous game she prepares to play. Only Jorah recognizes the madness in her intentions, and his weathered face pales as he realizes what she means to do. "Khaleesi," he pleads, moving to her side as the torches are prepared to light the pyre. "You cannot mean to. The fire will consume you. You are blood of the dragon, yes, but you are also mortal flesh that burns like any other." Daenerys turns to face her most loyal knight, her violet eyes reflecting the flames that dance before them. "Am I Ser Jorah? Or have you forgotten the words of my house? Fire cannot kill a dragon." As the pyre blazes to life, consuming wood and silk and the earthly remains of the great Khal, those who remain of the Khalasar gather to watch their Khaleesi walk into flames that should mean certain death. Some weep for the madness that has claimed her, while others whisper prayers to the horse god that he might protect her in the Nightlands. But Jorah Mormont stands silent, his hand unconsciously moving to his sword hilt as he prepares to follow his Khaleesi into whatever fate awaits her. The heat washes over Daenerys in waves that should drive her back, but instead she steps forward into fire that parts around her like water. Her clothes burn away to ash, but her skin remains unmarked, glowing with the same inner light that has always set Targaryens apart from common men. The dragon eggs crack and shatter in the heart of the blaze, releasing creatures of legend into a world that has forgotten their power. When dawn breaks over the Dothraki Sea, the pyre has burned down to smouldering ash and blackened bone. In its center, Daenerys Targaryen sits naked and unburned, 3 dragon hatchlings coiled around her body like living jewelry. The black dragon, largest of the 3, perches on her shoulder with wings spread wide despite their small size. The green dragon wraps around her arm, its scales gleaming like emeralds in the morning light. The cream-colored dragon nestles against her breast, its golden eyes bright with intelligence that seems almost human. The sight strikes the assembled Dothraki like a thunderbolt from their horse god, driving them to their knees in reverence and terror. Here stands their Khaleesi transformed, no longer merely the widow of a dead Khal, but something far more powerful, the mother of dragons, the unburnt, the rightful heir to the Targaryen legacy of fire and blood. "Blood of my blood," speaks Aggo, one of Drogo's former blood riders, his voice hoarse with amazement. "You are the stallion who mounts the world." The Dosh Khaleen spoke truly in their prophecies. But Daenerys' thoughts turn westward, toward the land of her birth and the Iron Throne that should belong to her bloodline. The dragons on her body shift and purr like cats, their presence filling her with strength that has nothing to do with mortal muscle and bone. Magic has returned to the world, and with it, the power to reclaim what was stolen from her family. "Gather those who would follow," she commands, rising from the ashes with dragons perched on her shoulders like symbols of divine authority. We ride for the cities of Slaver's Bay, where gold and ships wait to carry us home to the 7 kingdoms. The Khalasar that forms around her is smaller than Drogo's great host, but it burns with the fervor of true believers. Warriors who once followed for plunder and glory now follow for something greater, the chance to serve the mother of dragons in a conquest that will reshape the world. Word spreads across the grassland like wildfire, drawing sellswords and exiles, priests and prophecy seekers, all eager to witness the return of magic to the world. Meanwhile, thousands of leagues to the west, the first reports of dragons reach the ports of the free cities like whispers of legend made real. Traders who deal in information as much as goods carry tales of a silver-haired Khaleesi who walks through fire unburned, whose dragons dance in the sky above the Dothraki Sea. But these stories compete with more immediate concerns: trade disputes, city politics, the endless squabbles between merchant princes that have defined Essos for generations. In Pentos, Illyrio Mopatis reads the reports in his silk-draped chamber with the calculating gaze of a master schemer whose greatest gamble has begun to pay dividends. The eggs he gifted to the young Targaryen bride were ancient things, purchased at vast expense from the Shadowlands beyond Ashai. That they have hatched into living dragons represents a return on investment that could reshape the balance of power across 2 continents. "The girl has surprised us all," he murmurs to the servant who brought the latest intelligence from the east. Perhaps it is time to reconsider our arrangements with certain parties in King's Landing. But in Westeros itself, the news arrives fragmented and distorted, mixed with the usual tales of monsters and marvels that merchants use to enliven their reports. In the small council chambers of the Red Keep, Varys mentions dragon sightings in his weekly briefing, though his tone suggests little more than passing interest in foreign curiosities. Traders from Pentos speak of unusual activities in the Dothraki Sea, the Spider reports to the assembled council, his soft voice carrying no sense of urgency. Stories of dragons, though such tales grow in the telling and doubtless have more to do with politics than actual monsters. Tywin Lannister barely glances up from the tax assessments he reviews, his attention focused on more immediate concerns than fairy tales from across the narrow sea. Inform me if these stories begin to affect trade routes or shipping schedules. Otherwise, let the Easterners amuse themselves with whatever legends they prefer. The dismissal is typical of the Hand's approach to external threats, practical to a fault, focused on measurable consequences rather than possibilities that exist beyond the realm of normal experience. In this calculation lies both Tywin's greatest strength and his most dangerous weakness, the ability to manage what can be quantified, but blindness to forces that transcend mere politics and economics. Grandmaster Pycelle nods in agreement with his Lord Hand's assessment, though something in his ancient memory stirs at the mention of dragons. He has read the histories, knows the old lore about Targaryen fire, and the beasts that once ruled the skies above Westeros. But surely such things belong to the distant past, relics of an age when magic flowed more freely through the world. Perhaps we should maintain closer observation of these developments, Pycelle suggests carefully. The histories speak of the power that dragons once possessed, and prudence suggests that even unlikely threats deserve attention. But Tywin waves away these concerns with the confidence of a man who has built his career on dealing with realities rather than possibilities. Dragons belong to children's tales and Meister's histories, not to the practical business of governing the Seven Kingdoms. Let the Dothraki waste their time worshipping whatever lizards or serpents their Khaleesi has managed to train. The Iron Throne faces more immediate challenges from closer enemies. As autumn deepens toward winter, the disconnect between Eastern reality and Western perception grows ever more dangerous. In Slaver's Bay, Daenerys Targaryen begins her conquest of Astapor with dragons at her side and prophecy in her heart. The ancient cities tremble before forces they thought had passed forever from the world, while their former slaves rise to follow the breaker of chains toward a destiny written in fire and blood. But in King's Landing, the Game of Thrones continues to focus on gold and politics, alliances and betrayals, the familiar dance of power that has defined Westeros for generations. The lords who plot against each other in the Red Keep's corridors cannot imagine threats that come riding on wings of flame, wielded by a teenage girl whose bloodline carries the memory of conquest. Far to the north in Winterfell, Maester Luwin reads the same reports that reach the capital, though his scholarly mind proves more receptive to possibilities that transcend normal understanding. In the quiet of his tower, surrounded by books and instruments that speak to mysteries beyond common knowledge, he pens a letter to the Citadel that asks careful questions about dragon lore and Targaryen prophecies. The wheel turns, and the world prepares for changes that will reshape the very foundations of power. Magic returns to a realm that has forgotten its true nature, while those who rule through gold and steel remain blind to threats that cannot be bought or beaten into submission. The Mother of Dragons rides east toward destiny, her children growing stronger with each passing day. And in Westeros, the lords who dismissed Targaryen restoration as the fantasy of powerless exiles will soon discover that some fantasies possess teeth and claws and wings that blot out the sun. The Game of Thrones has always been played with pieces that move across familiar squares in predictable patterns. But now new pieces enter the board, pieces that fly above the game itself, breathing fire upon those who thought themselves safe in their castles of stone and steel. Winter comes to Westeros with snow and ice, but from the east comes something far more dangerous, the return of fire made flesh, and with it the promise that the age of mortals may be ending. The great hall of Dragonstone echoes with the sound of steel on stone as Stannis Baratheon slams his sword onto the table before him, the metallic ring cutting through the winter air like a judgment bell. Around the table sit the lords and knights who have answered his summons, their weathered faces reflecting the gravity of the accusations their liege prepares to make public. In Stannis's other hand, he holds a leather portfolio thick with documents and testimonies that will shake the foundations of the Seven Kingdoms. "My lords," Stannis begins, his voice carrying the harsh certainty that has defined his character since childhood, "I have gathered you here to bear witness to truths that can no longer remain hidden. The succession of the Iron Throne rests upon a lie that threatens the very fabric of the realm." Lord Celtigar leans forward in his chair, his aged features creased with concern. "My lord, these are dangerous words. What evidence do you possess that would warrant such accusations?" Stannis opens the portfolio with deliberate ceremony, revealing pages covered in the precise handwriting of Grand Maester Pycelle and the careful observations of multiple witnesses. 17 years of evidence, my lord. 17 years of bastards masquerading as true-born princes, while the rightful succession remains obscured by Lannister gold and royal blindness. The documents tell a story that has been whispered in the shadows of King's Landing for years, but never spoken aloud by men of rank and authority. Marriage records, birth dates, careful genealogies tracing the bloodlines of House Baratheon and House Lannister. Physical descriptions noting the golden hair that marks all of Queen Cersei's children, contrasted with the black hair that has characterized Baratheon bloodlines for generations. Jon Arryn died seeking this truth, Stannis continues, his jaw clenched with righteous fury. The Hand who served faithfully for 17 years was murdered because he discovered what I now lay before you, that Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen are not Robert's children, but the bastard offspring of incest between the Queen and her twin brother. The accusation hangs in the air like a thunderbolt, striking the assembled lords with the force of revelation that could topple dynasties. Some gasp in shock, while others nod grimly, as if long-held suspicions have finally been confirmed. All understand that speaking such truths aloud represents a point of no return from which there can be no retreat. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, the streets around the great sept of Baelor fill with common folk whose faces bear the marks of suffering under Tywin Lannister's harsh policies. The faithful have gathered not for worship, but for something far more dangerous, armed resistance to the corruption they perceive in the Crown's governance. The High Septon stands before the sept's crystal doors, his simple robes a stark contrast to the gilded magnificence that surrounds him. "Brothers and sisters," the High Septon calls to the crowd, his voice carrying easily across the square, "we gather in sight of the Seven to speak truths that the powerful would keep hidden. The crown that should protect the faithful instead oppresses them, while those who should serve the gods pursue only gold and power." The crowd responds with roars of approval, their voices echoing off the stone buildings that line the square. These are not the wealthy merchants or noble-born who typically influence royal policy, but the craftsmen and labourers whose livelihoods have been crushed beneath the weight of Lannister taxation and regulation. "What do you counsel, Your Holiness?" calls a blacksmith, whose forge has been shuttered by fees he cannot afford to pay. How do the faithful respond to faithful leaders who betray their sacred trusts? "We respond as the warrior would have us respond," the High Septon declares, his words striking like hammer blows. "We take up righteous arms in defense of the innocent. We restore the faith militant to protect those whom secular authority fails to defend. The announcement sends shockwaves through the gathering, for all know the history of the faith militant, the warrior monks who once challenged kings and brought down dynasties in the name of religious purity. That such an organization might rise again represents a threat to royal authority that goes beyond mere political opposition. In the Red Keep, King Robert sits in his private chambers with a cup of wine trembling in his hands, reading and rereading the letter that arrived from Dragonstone that morning. Stannis's accusations sprawl across the parchment in stark black ink, each word carefully chosen to convey maximum impact. The evidence his brother presents proves overwhelming in its scope and detail, painting a picture of deception that reaches back to the earliest days of Robert's reign. "Cersei!" Robert calls, his voice hoarse with rage and wine. "Come here. Now." The Queen enters the chamber with the fluid grace that has defined her since girlhood, her golden hair gleaming in the candlelight and her green eyes bright with the confidence of one who has played this game for nearly 2 decades. But something in Robert's bearing warns her that this confrontation will be different from their usual quarrels about money and governance. "You wanted to see me, husband?" she asks, though her tone carries more wariness than affection. Robert rises from his chair with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who has finally reached the limits of his patience. In his hand, he holds Stannis's letter like a weapon waiting to be deployed. "Tell me about our children, Cersei. Tell me about their fathers." The question strikes her like a physical blow, though she manages to maintain her composure through years of practice in concealing dangerous truths. "Our children are princes and princess of House Baratheon, born of our lawful marriage. What more is there to say?" "There is this to say," Robert snarls, thrusting the letter toward her face. "My brother has spent months gathering evidence about bloodlines and birth records. He presents testimony from servants, wet nurses, and palace guards. He documents the timing of births against the timing of my presence in the capital." His voice grows louder with each word. "And he concludes that none of the children you bore are mine." Cersei's mask finally slips, revealing the cold calculation that lies beneath her queenly facade. "Your brother seeks to cause trouble because he covets your crown. These accusations are nothing more than ambitious lies designed to destabilize your reign." "Are they?" Robert's hand moves to his warhammer, the weapon that won him a kingdom and could yet unmake one. "Then explain to me why every bastard I've ever sired has black hair like mine, while every child you've borne has golden hair like yours. Explain why Joffrey looks nothing like me, but bears a striking resemblance to your brother, Jaime." The confrontation that follows shakes the Red Keep to its foundations, royal voices raised in accusation and denial, while servants flee the corridors to avoid witnessing treasons that could see them all hanged. The truth that has lurked in shadows for 17 years finally emerges into the light, bringing with it the promise of civil war and dynastic collapse. In the Tower of the Hand, Tywin Lannister receives reports of unrest from across the realm with the grim efficiency that has characterized his response to all challenges since taking office. But even his legendary composure shows strain as ravens arrive, bearing news of rebellions, religious uprisings, and accusations that strike at the heart of Lannister power. "Stannis has declared for himself," Kevan Lannister reports, his voice tight with concern. "He proclaims Joffrey a bastard and calls for a great council to determine the rightful succession." "And the Riverlands?" Tywin asks, though his tone suggests he already knows the answer. "In open revolt. Lord Blackwood has raised his banners and called upon his neighbors to resist what he terms Lannister occupation of their territories. The Mallisters and Vances have answered his call. The Faith? Armed and dangerous. They call themselves the Faith Militant again, and speak of cleansing the realm of corruption. Their influence spreads beyond King's Landing to every sept and holy house in the kingdom. Each report brings worse news than the last, painting a picture of realm-wide resistance to Lannister rule that threatens to tear the Seven Kingdoms apart. Tywin's efforts to consolidate power through efficient authoritarianism have instead created the very chaos he sought to prevent, pushing former allies beyond their breaking point. Far to the north in Winterfell, the ravens that arrive bring Ned Stark face to face with the consequences of decisions made months earlier. The lords who once served faithfully under his command now beg for his leadership in their struggle against Lannister tyranny. Each letter carries the weight of loyalty and desperation, appeals from men who remember when honor meant more than gold. Lord Blackwood writes from Raventree Hall, Catelyn observes as they read through the correspondence together. He asks for your support in defending the Riverlands against what he calls unlawful occupation by Lannister forces. And Lord Royce from the Vale, Ned adds grimly. He speaks of gathering the mountain clans to resist any attempt by the Crown to impose outside authority on their traditional freedoms. They're asking you to break your oath of fealty to the Iron Throne, Catelyn says quietly. To choose between loyalty to Robert and loyalty to the lords who have served House Stark faithfully for generations. Ned sets down the letters and moves to the window, gazing out over the snow-covered Godswood, where his ancestors lie buried beneath winter's white shroud. The choice before him represents everything he has sought to avoid, a decision that will force him to take sides in a conflict that threatens to consume the realm. What does your conscience counsel? Catelyn asks, though she already knows the struggle that tears at her husband's heart. My conscience counsels that I cannot abandon men who call upon me for aid in their darkest hour, Ned replies slowly. But it also counsels that breaking faith with my king, even a king who has failed in his duties, violates every principle I have tried to live by. And what does your wisdom counsel? That sometimes principles must bend before practical necessities. The realm burns while we debate the finer points of feudal obligation. Perhaps it is time to choose the greater good over the letter of the law. Outside their window, snow continues to fall across Winterfell's ancient stones, covering the castle in white that speaks of the winter that has finally arrived. But inside the solar where Lord and Lady Stark wrestle with choices that will shape the future of Westeros, another kind of winter settles over them, the winter of decisions that must be made regardless of their cost. The Game of Thrones has reached its crisis point, where all the careful maneuvering and patient scheming of the past months must give way to direct action. In King's Landing, the truth about royal bastards tears the court apart. In the Riverlands, open rebellion spreads like wildfire. In Dragonstone, Stannis prepares to press his claim with steel and righteousness. And in Winterfell, Ned Stark faces the moment he has dreaded since refusing Robert's offer, the choice between safety and honor, between family and duty, between the comfortable isolation of the North and the dangerous necessities of realm-wide leadership. The storm that has been building since Catelyn convinced him to stay in Winterfell finally breaks across the Seven Kingdoms, bringing with it winds of change that will reshape the political landscape forever. Winter has come to Westeros in more ways than one, and the wolves of Winterfell must decide whether to remain safely in their dens or venture forth to hunt in the gathering darkness. The Great Hall of Winterfell has never hosted a gathering quite like the one that fills it now. Every major lord of the North sits at the long tables, their banners hanging from the ancient stone walls like a roll call of northern power. The Great Yon's giant fist pounds the table as he speaks, while Lady Mormont's steel-grey eyes flash with determination. The Manderleys, Karstarks, Glovers and Reeds have all answered Ned Stark's summons, bringing with them the weight of decisions that will shape the future of the Seven Kingdoms. The realm burns, declares Rickard Karstark, his weathered face grim with the knowledge that comes from ravens bearing news of war. Stannis has raised his banners on Dragonstone. The Riverlands bleed under Lannister occupation. The Faith takes up arms in the streets of King's Landing. We can no longer pretend that northern isolation will protect us from southern madness. Murmurs of agreement ripple through the assembled lords, their voices creating a low rumble that speaks to shared conviction. These men have spent months watching the realm tear itself apart while their own lands remained at peace. But peace built on the suffering of others proves both temporary and ultimately untenable. Ned Stark sits in his lord's chair, silent and thoughtful, as his bannermen debate the choice that will define their generation. The letters from desperate lords across the realm lie before him on the table, each one a plea for the kind of honorable leadership that has vanished from King's Landing. The weight of their trust presses upon him like a physical burden. Lord Blackwood writes that Lannister forces burn villages throughout the Riverlands, reports Maester Luwin, his voice carrying the scholarly precision that makes his words all the more terrible. They justify these actions as necessary to suppress rebellion, but their definition of rebellion appears to include any criticism of royal policy. "And what of the king?" asks Wyman Manderley, his massive frame filling his chair as he leans forward with concern. Does Robert Baratheon approve of these measures, or has his hand exceeded his authority? The distinction matters little, Catelyn interjects from her place beside Ned's chair. Whether Robert commands these actions or merely permits them, the result remains the same for those who suffer under them. Her voice carries the political wisdom inherited from her Tully upbringing. We face a choice between action and complicity. There is no middle ground. The observation strikes at the heart of the dilemma that has brought them together. Throughout their history, the northern lords have prided themselves on their independence and their honor. But both qualities demand action when confronted with the kind of systematic oppression that Tywin Lannister has unleashed across the realm. Jon Umber rises from his seat, his enormous frame commanding attention through presence alone. "I fought beside Lord Stark in 2 wars, he rumbles, his voice carrying the authority of shared combat. I've seen him face choices that would break lesser men, and I've never known him to choose the easy path over the right one." His dark eyes fix on Ned with unwavering loyalty. If Lord Stark calls the banners, the Umbers will answer. One by one, the other lords voice their agreement, their pledges creating a cascade of commitment that transforms the gathering from debate to war council. The Karstarks offer their heavy horse, the Manderleys their siege equipment and ships, the Mormonts their fierce warriors. Each pledge strengthens the whole, building the foundation for military action that will shake the 7 kingdoms. "But who commands?" asks Galbart Glover, his practical mind already turning to the logistics of war. "Lord Stark must remain in the north to defend against Ironborn raids and wildling incursions. We cannot leave our homeland unprotected while we march south." All eyes turn to Robb Stark, who has listened to the discussion with the intensity of a young man coming of age in extraordinary circumstances. At 14 years old, the heir to Winterfell has grown tall and strong, his auburn hair catching the firelight as he considers the weight of leadership that may soon fall upon his shoulders. "I will lead," Robb says quietly, his voice carrying none of the hesitation one might expect from someone so young. "I have trained for this duty my entire life. The lords who ride south need a Stark to follow, and if my father cannot leave the north, then I must serve in his place." The declaration brings nods of approval from the assembled lords, who have watched Robb's training with approval and see in him the promise of worthy leadership. But it also brings looks of concern from parents who understand the risks of sending someone so young to command in wartime. "The boy has courage," acknowledges Lady Maege Mormont, "but courage alone does not win wars. He will need experienced advisors, careful planning, and the kind of tactical support that prevents bravery from becoming tragedy. He will have all of that, Ned promises, his voice carrying the weight of paternal protection and political necessity. Lord Karstark and the Greatjon will serve as his senior commanders, while Ser Roderick accompanies him as military advisor. The Northern Army will be led by youth, but guided by wisdom. As the discussion continues, another figure moves quietly through the corridors of Winterfell, wrestling with his own impossible choice. Jon Snow has heard the talk of war and mobilization, understanding that the conflict ahead will reshape everything he has known about his place in the world. At 14 years old, the bastard son of Ned Stark stands taller than most grown men, his dark hair and grey eyes marking him clearly as a son of Winterfell, despite his illegitimate birth. In the Godswood, where ancient trees stand sentinel beneath winter stars, Jon finds the solitude he needs to consider the path that calls to him. The Night's Watch has always seemed like a distant possibility, a potential escape from the uncertain position of a bastard in a lord's household. But now, with war coming and his family facing danger, the choice takes on new urgency. "You're thinking about the wall," comes a voice from the shadows, and Jon turns to find his father approaching through the snow-covered trees. "Am I that obvious?" Jon asks, though his tone carries more resignation than surprise, to someone who has wrestled with similar choices. "Yes." Ned moves to stand beside his son, both men silent for a moment as they consider the weight of duty and desire. The Night's Watch serves the realm in ways that sometimes go unrecognized. In the wars to come, that service may prove more valuable than anyone realizes. "You think I should take the black?" "I think you should do what your honor demands, as you have always done." Ned places a hand on Jon's shoulder, the gesture carrying years of paternal affection, despite the circumstances of the boy's birth. The Night's Watch needs good men, now more than ever, but the choice must be yours. Jon nods slowly, understanding that his father speaks truth about both duty and freedom. In the Black Brothers of the Night's Watch, he might find the brotherhood and purpose that legitimate birth has denied him. And in defending the wall, he would serve the realm in ways that require no apology or explanation. Meanwhile, in the Lady's Solar, Catelyn oversees preparations of a different sort as she coordinates the safety of the family members who cannot be protected through military action alone. Arya and Bran, at 9 and 7 years old respectively, remain too young for the battlefield, but too precious to risk in a castle that might itself become a target. The Vale remains neutral in this conflict, Catelyn observes, as she reviews the letters that will secure her children's safety. "My sister may be difficult, but she will not refuse sanctuary to her own niece and nephew." Sansa, at 11 years old, and already showing signs of the beauty that will one day make her a valuable marriage alliance, listens to these discussions with the solemn attention of a girl who understands that her life is about to change dramatically. "Will I see you again soon?" she asks her mother, her blue eyes bright with unshed tears. "Sooner than you think, sweetling," Catelyn promises, though both know that war has a way of making promises difficult to keep. "Your Aunt Lysa will care for you in the Eyrie, and when this conflict ends, we will all be together again." The preparations continue through the night, as Winterfell transforms from a seat of peaceful governance into a center of military coordination. Ravens fly to every corner of the north, bearing orders for mobilization, while smiths work frantically to repair weapons and armor. The castle's stores, carefully accumulated throughout the autumn months, will now supply an army marching to war, rather than a household enduring winter. By dawn, the transformation is complete. In the courtyard where young lords once practiced with wooden swords, seasoned warriors now prepare for battles that will determine the fate of kingdoms. The banners of 30 northern houses flutter in the wind, their sigils creating a tapestry of loyalty and determination. Robb Stark emerges from the keep wearing mail and leather, his sword at his hip and his face bearing the gravity of command. Around him gather the lords who will follow him south, their own preparations complete and their resolve unshakable. The young wolf has grown into his role with the speed that only crisis can demand. "Remember," Ned tells his son as they stand together before the assembled army, "you fight not for conquest, but for justice. You ride south not to claim lands, but to restore honor to the realm. Let that guide every decision you make." "I will, father," Robb promises, his voice carrying the weight of inherited responsibility. "The North will show the rest of the realm what true leadership looks like." As the Northern Army begins its march south, other preparations unfold across the Seven Kingdoms. Ravens fly between Winterfell and Dragonstone, carrying messages that forge the alliance between Stark honor and Baratheon justice. Similar communications reach the Riverlands, where Lord Blackwood and his allies prepare to coordinate their rebellion with Northern intervention. The war that begins this day will be different from the chaotic bloodbath that might have emerged from unprepared conflict. Instead, it represents the careful application of coordinated force by leaders who understand both the stakes and the sacrifices required for victory. The North enters the Game of Thrones not as desperate players, but as determined participants who have chosen their side through careful deliberation. In the crypts of Winterfell, where stone kings watch over their descendants with cold eyes, the newest chapter in Northern history begins to take shape. The wolves have finally chosen to hunt, and their prey will discover that patient predators prove far more dangerous than impulsive ones. Winter winds blow across the battlements of Winterfell as the last of Robb's army disappears beyond the horizon, carrying with it the hopes and fears of an ancient house. Behind them, Ned Stark begins his own preparations for the defense of the North, while scattered across the realm, his children find sanctuary in the care of allies who will protect them until the storms of war finally pass. The Game of Thrones has claimed new players, and the pieces on the board shift to accommodate forces that have remained hidden until now. The Golden Lion may rule in King's Landing, but the Grey Wolf has finally emerged from its den, and the hunt that follows will reshape the very foundations of power in Westeros. The North remembers, and now all the Seven Kingdoms will learn what that remembrance means when backed by the strength of winter wolves united in common cause. The field beside the Trident runs red with blood as the last great battle of the war draws to its climax. But this time, the outcome proves far different from the conflict that decided Robert's rebellion decades earlier. Here, where Prince Rhaegar once fell beneath Robert's hammer, the fate of the Seven Kingdoms again hangs in the balance as two armies clash in the shadow of the Ruby Ford. Tywin Lannister sits his destrier in the center of his battle line, resplendent in crimson and gold, his green eyes surveying the forces arrayed against him with the calculating gaze that has defined his approach to warfare throughout his career. But the enemy he faces today represents something he has never encountered before, a coalition united not by ambition or greed, but by shared commitment to justice and honor. Across the field, the banners of three kingdoms flutter in the autumn wind. The dire wolf of Stark stands beside the crowned stag of Baratheon, while the trout of Tully swims among the northern sigils that have answered Robb Stark's call to arms. The young wolf himself rides at the fore of the northern host, his auburn hair bright beneath his helm, as he prepares to prove that courage and righteousness can triumph over gold and fear. "Today we end this," Stannis Baratheon declares from his position among the Dragonstone forces, his voice carrying the harsh certainty that has driven him throughout the conflict. "Today, we restore legitimate rule to the Seven Kingdoms and bring justice to those who have suffered under Lannister tyranny. The battle that follows proves brutal but decisive, as disciplined northern infantry and riverland cavalry shatter Lannister lines that have grown complacent through months of easy victories over poorly organized opposition. Tywin's tactical brilliance, so effective against scattered rebels and religious zealots, proves inadequate against enemies who have spent months coordinating their strategies and learning from each other's strengths. In the center of the melee, where the fighting grows fiercest and the outcome hangs in the balance, Ned Stark finds himself face to face with the man whose policies have driven the realm to civil war. Tywin Lannister raises his sword with the skill of a lifetime warrior, but there is something in his eyes that speaks to the recognition of defeat, not just in this battle, but in the larger war for the soul of Westeros. "You could have served the realm with honor," Ned says, as their blades clash, the ring of steel on steel cutting through the chaos around them. "Instead, you chose to rule through fear and greed." "I chose what worked," Tywin replies, pressing his attack with the desperate fury of a man who has gambled everything on a single throw of the dice. Honor is a luxury that weak kings cannot afford. "And yet here we stand," Ned observes, parrying a thrust that might have ended their duel. "The weak king you despise commands armies that tear apart your perfect system." The final exchange lasts only moments, but its outcome reshapes the political landscape of the Seven Kingdoms forever. Tywin Lannister, the Golden Lion who built an empire on calculation and control, falls to the simple swordwork of a northern lord who fights not for conquest, but for justice. As news of Tywin's death spreads across the battlefield, the remaining Lannister forces begin their collapse. Without their architect and commander, the complex system of loyalty and fear that held the Western army together disintegrates like smoke in the wind. By sunset, the battle is over, and with it dies the dream of Lannister supremacy. In King's Landing, the aftermath of military defeat triggers political revolution as the supporters of legitimate succession finally gain the upper hand. The small council that once served Tywin's interests now scrambles to accommodate the reality of Stannis Baratheon's approaching coronation, while in the Red Keep's private chambers, desperate conversations determine the fate of those who backed the losing side. "We must go," Cersei tells her children, as servants pack the few possessions they can carry in their flight from the capital. "Your grandfather is dead, your father has abdicated his crown to Stannis, and we are no longer welcome in Westeros." Joffrey, now 15 years old and struggling to understand how his world has crumbled so completely, stares at his mother with the confused rage of youth confronting its first real defeat. "Why should we flee from Uncle Stannis? I am still a prince of House Baratheon." "You are still a bastard born of incest," Cersei replies with harsh honesty, the first time she has spoken the truth aloud to her eldest son. "Stannis knows the truth of your parentage, and he will not suffer pretenders to live when he claims the throne." The revelation strikes Joffrey like a physical blow, but there is no time for lengthy explanations or emotional reconciliation. By dawn, Cersei and her children board a ship bound for the free cities, carrying with them nothing but their lives and the bitter knowledge that their golden age has ended forever. Meanwhile, in a tavern not far from the docks where Lannister ships prepare for departure, Robert Baratheon sits alone with a cup of wine and a crown he no longer wants to wear. At 36 years old, the king who won his throne through strength of arms has finally come to understand that wearing it requires different strengths entirely. "I was never meant for this," he tells Ned Stark when his oldest friend finds him in his self-imposed exile. "You told me that once, years ago, but I was too proud to listen." "The realm needed you then," Ned replies, taking a seat across from the man he has served faithfully, despite their disagreements. But perhaps it needs different leadership now. Stannis will make a better king than I ever did, Robert acknowledges, taking another drink from his cup. He has the will to make hard choices and the strength to enforce them. The Seven Kingdoms will be safer in his hands than they ever were in mine. The abdication ceremony that follows proves both formal and final, as Robert Baratheon surrenders the crown he has worn for 17 years to the brother who should have advised him from the beginning. Stannis accepts the Iron Throne with the grim satisfaction of a man who has finally claimed his birthright, while the assembled lords witness the first peaceful transfer of royal power in living memory. "Lord Stark," King Stannis says, as the ceremony concludes and the real work of governance begins, "I would ask you to serve as my hand. The realm has need of your wisdom and your honor." For a moment, Ned considers the weight of the offer that he refused so many months ago when it came from Robert. But this time, the circumstances prove fundamentally different. Instead of cleaning up the mess left by weak leadership, he would help build something better from the foundation up. "I accept, Your Grace," Ned replies, understanding that his duty to the realm finally aligns with his ability to serve it effectively. "Though I would ask for certain accommodations regarding the North's traditional autonomy." "Name them." "The North will govern itself in all matters that do not directly concern the Crown. We will maintain our own laws, collect our own taxes, and command our own armies. In exchange, we pledge loyalty to the Iron Throne and will answer any call for aid in defending the realm." The terms represent exactly the kind of balance between central authority and regional independence that wise kings learn to negotiate. Stannis, whose rigid nature might seem to preclude such flexibility, recognizes the wisdom of accommodating those who have proven their loyalty through action rather than demanding submission through force. "Agreed," the king declares. "Let the North remember its ancient freedoms while serving the greater good of the realm." As winter deepens across the Seven Kingdoms, the changes implemented by the new government begin to show their effects. The crushing taxes that drove the Riverlands to rebellion are replaced by more reasonable assessments that balance royal needs with regional prosperity. The faith militant, no longer needed to resist secular oppression, returns to its traditional role of protecting the innocent and ministering to the poor. In Winterfell, where Catelyn Stark oversees the return of family members scattered by war, the great hall fills once again with the voices of those she loves. Arya and Bran arrive from the Vale, their time with Aunt Lisa having taught them both patience and the value of family bonds. Sansa, now 12 years old and wise beyond her years, brings with her letters from southern lords expressing gratitude for northern intervention in their struggles. "Will Robb return soon?" young Rickon asks his mother, his 4-year-old voice carrying the simple desire of a child who misses his older brother. "Very soon, little one," Catelyn promises, though she knows that Robb has responsibilities in the south that may keep him away longer than any of them would prefer. "He helps your father establish the new order, ensuring that the peace we have won will last." The peace that settles over the realm proves both hard-earned and carefully maintained, built not on the suppression of dissent, but on the inclusion of different voices in governance. The great lords who might have chafed under authoritarian rule find themselves partners in a system that respects their traditional roles while expecting responsible leadership in return. Far to the east, where dragons soar above the smoking ruins of Slaver's Bay, Daenerys Targaryen receives unexpected visitors in the form of Westerosi exiles seeking sanctuary in her growing empire. Cersei Lannister and her children arrive in Meereen aboard a merchant vessel, their golden hair and green eyes marking them as former enemies, now reduced to supplicants, begging for protection. You seek refuge from the justice of Stannis Baratheon, Daenerys observes, as she sits upon the throne carved from the harpy's head, her dragons perched behind her, like living symbols of power. Tell me why the mother of dragons should shelter those who served the usurpers, who drove her family into exile. The answer to that question lies in the future, beyond the scope of this tale, but carrying within it the seeds of conflicts yet to come. For now, it is enough to know that dragons have returned to the world, and that their fire will eventually test even the most carefully constructed peace. In King's Landing, where the Iron Throne stands beneath banners that display the crowned stag of Baratheon rather than the golden lion of Lannister, King Stannis begins the long work of rebuilding institutions that have been corrupted by years of misrule. His hand, Ned Stark, brings to this task the same methodical thoroughness that has characterized northern governance for generations. The realm faces winter, united and prepared, Stannis observes, as they review reports from across the Seven Kingdoms. For the first time in memory, we have competent leadership in every region and adequate supplies to sustain our people through the cold months ahead. The North taught me that winter survival depends on cooperation rather than competition, Ned replies. Perhaps that lesson has finally reached the South. Outside the Red Keep's windows, the first snow of winter begins to fall over King's Landing, dusting the cobblestone streets with white that speaks of the long, cold season ahead. But within the castle walls, warmth comes not just from hearth fires, but from the knowledge that the realm finally possesses the leadership necessary to guide its people safely through whatever trials await them. The Game of Thrones continues, as it always has and always will. But the players who now sit at the board understand that the true victory lies not in claiming power, but in using it wisely. The wolves of Winterfell have achieved their goals: family safety, regional autonomy, and the restoration of justice to the realm. The storm that began with Catelyn's wise counsel to refuse a poisoned offer has ended with a dawn that promises brighter days ahead. Winter comes to Westeros as it always has, but this time the Seven Kingdoms face it with unity of purpose and strength of leadership that transforms a season of trial into an opportunity for renewal. The North remembers, and now all the realm will learn what that remembrance means when guided by wisdom rather than driven by fear. The Age of Gold gives way to an age of iron and justice, built not on the foundations of wealth and corruption, but on the bedrock of honor and service to the greater good. In Winterfell's crypts, where stone kings watch over their descendants, the newest chapter in the long history of the North reaches its conclusion with the knowledge that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from seizing power, but from knowing when to refuse it. That's our theory. Westeros is a land filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and we love exploring them. If you want to accompany us on this journey across the Seven Kingdoms and beyond, then please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. What if Robb Stark discovered Jon Snow was a Targaryen before the Red Wedding? What if Jon Snow hatched a dragon egg at Winterfell as a child? What if Ned Stark executed Cersei and Jaime? After reading the Lineages book, what if Rhaegar's letter to Ned Stark was discovered after the rebellion? What if Arya Stark became a faceless man and assassinated Tywin Lannister? What if Joffrey turned on the Lannisters and declared himself a true Baratheon? What if Oberyn Martell and Robb Stark formed an alliance against the Lannisters? What if the Iron Throne rejected every non-Targaryen who sat on it? What if Jaime Lannister discovered R plus L equals J while captive at River Run? What if Varys secretly raised Jon Snow in Essos to be king? What if Rhaegar Targaryen survived the Trident and faced Robert at King's Landing? What if Brienne of Tarth arrived in time to save Robb Stark at the Red Wedding? What if Tywin Lannister used Jon Snow's parentage to destroy the Starks? What if Ned Stark brought the entire Northern Army to King's Landing? What if Olenna Tyrell discovered R plus L equals J and used it to control the throne? What if Drogo survived and invaded Westeros with Daenerys and 3 dragons? What if Robb Stark captured King's Landing and put Joffrey on trial? What if Samwell Tarly discovered R plus L equals J at the Citadel and told Jon immediately? What if Tywin Lannister was forced to take the Black? What if Catelyn Stark convinced Ned to refuse Robert's offer to be hand? What if Daenerys discovered Jon Snow was her nephew before invading Westeros? What if Sandor Clegane killed the Mountain at the Tourney of the Hand? What if Roose Bolton betrayed the Lannisters and crowned himself king in the north? What if Ned Stark sent Jon Snow to Foster with the Martells in Dorne? What if Viserys Targaryen proved himself worthy and united with Daenerys? What if the 3-eyed raven showed Bran the truth about R plus L equals J during Robert's visit? What if Margaery Tyrell secretly allied with Daenerys against Cersei? What if Tyrion Lannister escaped King's Landing with Shae and never looked back?